Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission meeting for June 3rd, 2021. And as I ask my colleagues to come online, we'll also ask staff to be prepared to make announcements. First, to let the public know how they can electronically participate with us today. Mr. Busk?
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz. For the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise lower hand icon that's in the control panel. A red arrow pointed down means that your hand is raised. I will notify you when it's your turn to speak, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. You cannot donate time to another speaker or receive time from another speaker. Thank you.
And Mr. Busk, could you let everyone know who is sitting in for Mr. Bolton today in terms of managing the visuals?
Yes, sure. We have William Russell, who will be operating our slideshow in the background. So if you need to advance the slide, just let him know. Thank you.
Great. Well, we welcome Mr. Russell. As we go to roll call for Ms. Fennessy to do for us, I've had some questions from members of the public about digital plans. So I wanted to bring everyone's attention to a notice in our agenda. It's on the third page of our agenda, and it reads, hyperlinks to project plans are provided in the agenda. If the project plan is available, you will see the address in the agenda displayed as a blue underlined text. To view the project plan, simply click on the blue underlined address. So hopefully that allows the public to get easy access online to the plans that come before the Planning Commission. With that, Ms. Fennessy, are you ready to do a voice roll call for us?
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. I will now begin the roll call. Chair Schwartz,
Here?
Vice Chair Escobedo,
Here.
Commissioner Bonderson,
Here.
Commissioner Higgins,
Present.
Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Reed,
Here.
and Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. Now we'll go to preliminary matters with Ms. DeBusk. If you would please let us know to the first one, if we have any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items.
Madam Chair, we have none.
Do we have any announcements or appeals?
Yes, I would like to announce that the Planning Commission's approval of the project at 2 South Quarantina Street has been appealed to the City Council. We do not have a date yet, but as soon as I do, I will let the commission know, and we will choose a representative for that hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. Now we'll go to review, consideration, and action on the Planning Commission's May 13th, 2021 minutes. Commissioner Bonderson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a correction I'd like to offer to Ms. Fennessy. On page 4 of 6, under my comments. Just want to make sure she's with us. Shall I continue?
Mr. Russell, if you could go to page 4, is that what you said, Commissioner Bonderson?
Yes, that's correct, and he seems to be in the correct location.
Okay.
On the second to last bullet point, under would like to prioritize, I have a addition on the second line. I will just read it as I believe it should be. Would like to prioritize updating the board and commission guidelines and believes it should be at the top of the priority list because without them, the boards and commissions cannot do their jobs properly, effectively, and uniformly. So as you can see, I'm adding boards and commission with an S at the end of commissions and then making their jobs plural.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other edits to those meeting minutes? We'll take a moment and let everybody look at their notes if there are any. Okay, I don't see any other changes. Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Madam Chair, I'll move the minutes, special meeting minutes for May 13th, 2021.
I can second that. Thank you.
As amended,
very-
Madam Chair.
As amended, very good. So we have Commissioner Wiscombe and Bonderson as amended. Any discussion on that? Very good. Ms. Fennessy, would you please do a voice vote on the amended meeting minutes for May 13th?
Thank you. I'll now start the roll call vote. Vice Chair Escobedo,
Yeah.
Commissioner Bonderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins,
Abstain.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
and Chair Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Commissioner Higgins, you were identified as attending May 13th, and yet you've abstained on the meeting minutes.
I'm sorry. This was the,
May 13th. Let me just go back over my May 13th. And I'm looking at the roll call for May 13th in our meeting minutes. And you were here. You were participating.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I have my dates confused.
Okay.
I'll just change my vote to approve.
Okay. Ms. Fennessy, did you get that correction, please?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Glad we got that straightened out. Okay, very good. We've concluded that matter. Mr. Busk, let's go to any comments from members of the public not on our agenda today, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For anyone in the public that would like to make a comment on items not on today's agenda, please click the raise hand button. A red arrow pointed down indicates that your hand is raised, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. It looks like we have one public speaker. I will call on John Campanella. John Campanella, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Since Planning Commission shortly will be starting their field trips again, I have a following recommendation. Perhaps you can plan a field trip to the completed and especially recently completed multi-unit AUD projects. Perhaps meet with the owners, developers, architects to see now after they're completed how the buildings executed their compatibility, how they accommodated parking in a variety of ways, which is always a big issue, how they created open area as well as circulation to the residences. Perhaps ask and find out what they feel was done right, what they might do in the future, and other questions that perhaps the staff could provide in advance to get additional background to assist PC going forward as you think about policy recommendations and individual project reviews. Might really be helpful. Thanks for considering.
Thank you, Mr. Campanella. In fact, our commission did receive an invitation to visit 226 East De La Guerra. I know that Commissioner Lodge attended on her own, and this morning Commissioner Wiscombe and I had a site visit with the general manager of Radius for the entire property, which was very insightful. So appreciate that encouragement, Mr. Campanella, and I second that for all of us, so thank you. Any other members of the public, Ms. DeBusk, who would like to speak to us on items not on our agenda today?
Chair Schwartz, we do not. And so I will ask Ms. Fennessy if we received written general correspondence.
We have received 6 general public comments that was distributed to the board prior to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. With that, we're going to go to our first item, which is a discussion item. And I will ask Vice Chair Escobedo to stay on with me. As you might recall, both for sort of tag teaming on the insurance that we have our internet available to us throughout our hearings. Vice Chair Escobedo and I have decided to stay online together as much as possible, just to ensure smooth continuity throughout our hearings, just in case of internet instability. So thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo, for your willingness to do that. And with that, we would like to invite the representatives from Cottage Hospital to come online and make a brief presentation to us on an update for the years 2019 and 2020. And while we're waiting for them to come online, just for those commissioners who have not been with us following the Cottage Hospital master plan redevelopment over the many years, if you want any background information, substantial, I would encourage you to meet with staff, because there is significant documentation and a significant history to where we are today that we're not going to go over in the hearing today. And it's, again, really just by way of an update. Mr. Baumann, you're going to go first on behalf of staff making a presentation.
Yes, Chair Schwartz, just a very brief introduction to the Cottage staff. All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Cottage Hospital's construction update covering the years 2019 and 2020. Next slide, please. I think many of y'all have seen this over the years. It's been going on quite a number of years. There's a condition of approval of the overall project, the seismic upgrade project, to return to the planning commissioner each year for a status on the construction work. There was an environmental impact report, and there's mitigation measures. So we update the commission on the mitigation measures and talk about any issues that have come up in the previous year. And this will take place during construction and for 3 years after. This is just an informational hearing for the commission, and the commission would not be taking an action today. Next slide. So where the project has been recently is in what they call their phase 8, and that's the last phase. It consists of seismic upgrades to existing buildings and interior remodeling. Estimated completion is by June 2021. And I think Mr. Henderson from Cottage Hospital will be just giving us all an update on the latest news on the current construction. So it might be a spoiler alert for next year's annual review of 2021 progress. Next slide, please. One of the conditions we always review is tree care and maintenance. There's a very large designated Morton Bay fig tree on the site that's been protected and cared for during all the disturbance surrounding it. And also the site has numerous oak trees. Next slide, please. Those are all been taken care of, watered and fertilized, et cetera, and they remain in good health. Next slide. We also look at solid waste reduction. There's been a lot of demolition plus the normal construction debris, and they've done a really good job of reusing, recycling, et cetera, that material so that very little of it actually makes its way to a landfill. So there's been a 94% solid waste diversion rate since 2005, and it remains very high on those numbers. Next slide. And there's a requirement or a condition to meet with the neighbors, and Cottage has found that there's been very little neighbor interest. They haven't been really causing that much disturbance, and due to the low participation when they try to hold the meetings and the dwindling interest, plus the COVID-19 restrictions that halted work for a time, they haven't held neighborhood meetings. They've been keeping a complaint log all these years, and there's only one complaint log entry. It says we've seen a couple of others of these, just an incident of someone getting a flat tire. I think it was a piece of metal or screw. I don't remember exactly what it was that caused someone to have a flat tire, but it happened in Pueblo Street. So it's difficult to say that it was the construction by the hospital per se that caused that. Anyway, I think there was an attempt to follow up on that, they weren't able to follow through or follow up on that. Next slide, please. I think we can skip these. I just had these slides for reference if needed, but I think the applicant or Cottage Hospital's presentation covers the images pretty well. So I think we could turn it over to Mr. Henderson from Cottage Hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. That would conclude your presentation from staff then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson, it appears you are self-muted. If you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
Hi, Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm Nick Henderson. I'm the Vice President of Support Services at Cottage Health. I'm new to this process here with the master plan, updating with the Planning Commission. The previous Cottage representative that has sort of championed this since the early 2000s, Ron Biscaro, retired in March. And I've taken over the leadership role of what we call the FMP. This report covers data from 2019 and 2020. Last year's report was deferred with our focus here at the hospital and probably at the city in general on the pandemic response. So next slide, please. The project is a 7-phase project. There is no phase 7, which is how we get to phase 8. Phase 1, which was a large demolition sort of clearing project that finished in 2006. Phase 2, a couple parking structures, a childcare center, a central plant that finished in 08. Phase 3 was more demo and clearing that also finished in 08. Phase 4, which was probably the biggest change to healthcare here in the community, opened in, completed in 2011, opened in 2012 to the public. And if you've been a patient or come to visit a patient at Cottage Hospital, that's probably the project that you've noticed the most. It was roughly 400,000 square feet of new hospital. Phase 5 was a demo clearing project, few interior remodels, a link building as we knew it, that finished up in 2015. Phase 6 was another expansion sort of in the hole that we left from the legacy hospital that was demolished, and 2 new pavilions opened in 2018. And that takes us to phase 8, which is largely what we've been focused on the last 3 years, which is the upgrading of a legacy building seismic work, a 2nd floor administration suite, and I'll say some limited site work and public works work on the Pueblo Street. Next slide, please. So just in an aerial view on the red where it says phase 8, that would be Junipero Street. You can see Pueblo Street down by the main entrance. And then we're bordered on the left with Oak Park Lane and on the right by Bath Street. The area highlighted in yellow is our Pueblo Pavilion, and that's largely where all the phase 8 work occurred over the last 3 years. It's a legacy building, was built in the 60s. We upgraded the building to be seismically compliant to current standards. And the street work occurred in this area as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the schedule, and this is probably the longest schedule of my career here, starting back in 2002 with city entitlement. And you can chase through all the phases of work there to get to the red bar right at the end. And as of 2 weeks ago, we were projecting a June 15th, 2021 completion. So nothing has changed there. Some of the projects that we know as phase 8 are signed off currently. We're pouring, I think, our last slivers of concrete today for public works. And all signs point to this being wrapped up here in the next 12 days. Next slide, please. Phase 8, if you're interested here, we can talk a little bit about what that seismic upgrade means. It's largely OSHPD language, which is the authority having jurisdiction on our buildings per se. SPC 4D is structural performance category. That's really the enhancement of the physical structure of the building. NPC 4, we get into bracing all of the critical utilities. So, you know, should the earth shake, the building withstands it and keeps on operating. Next slide, please. Here is I'll say a graphic of the Pueblo Pavilion. It's hard to tell. There's parts of the existing hospital that attach to this, but you can see some shear panels. On the lower photo, you can see the X bracing that runs up the Pueblo Street side of the building. And it's probably the only thing really visible, I'll say, to the neighborhood or community that has noticeably changed as part of phase 8. Next slide, please. The micro piles, these are a lot of large piles that were put in really deep to support some of the new shear walls and give the building more lateral stability. Next slide. Shotcrete, I don't know if you're familiar with shotcrete. We see it a lot here, reinforcing existing concrete walls by adding a significant amount of rebar to it and another essential 6-8 inches of concrete. Next slide. This is the X bracing that we were talking about along Pueblo Street. This was during construction. This is the thing when I talk to community members that they mention the most, about, hey, that looks really cool. What are you guys doing to that building? Next slide. I think the next slide shows it in its completed form. Or did we miss one? Maybe not. No, maybe we'll get to it later. This is a drag beam. So on the interior of the building, this is sort of the Oshpod solution to withstanding more lateral forces. You can see a chunk of concrete that will eventually be poured there. There is more rebar in the drag beams than I can ever imagine inserting, but they seem to make it work. Next slide. The utility bracing that we talked about, for all the critical utilities, this goes from fire sprinkler piping to electrical conduits to water lines. And everything gets seismically braced as well as gravity. Next slide. Part of phase 8 was the remodel of our administration suite. Those that have been in the hospital and remember the entrance up until the main entrance up until 2012 on the corner of Pueblo and Bath, you walked right by, there was a cafe that sat here, a gift shop, and administration was always in this area. It has since been remodeled. We received sign off earlier this week or late last week from Oshpod on this project. That's the entrance. Next slide, I think, shows the conference room that goes with it. Furniture will be delivered in a few months here if we can get a commitment from our furniture supplier. Next slide, please. Other noticeable things, this is the main entrance, used to be a driveway through here. The landscaping has been completed for a while. The stonework you can see in the background. This is something, another thing that a lot of people remark on, just seeing the new landscaping, less asphalt, more plants. Next slide. Close up of the ashlar sandstone wall. And you can see a picture on the left of when it was built. Next slide. And this is one of the exits off of the main entrance that takes you down to Pueblo Street there. Next slide. And now we hop sort of over to the other side of the building where we had more site work completed. This is the area where I think we saw the micropile picture earlier. And you can see the new walkways going in, the drainage required, and the permeable pavers. Next slide. Planner through here. Next slide. And then the Pueblo Street improvement. So these photos, I would say, are probably 30 days old. I've walked out through the permeable pavers, and it's all landscape now. It looks similar to what we saw on the east side earlier. Next slide. And then I'll say lastly that one of the things, since we opened the helipad in 2012, it did inspire a lot of neighborhood conversation, I think, in the planning process from what I've heard, and then after we opened it. So we've always tracked helicopter landings, we monitor flight paths, and we have complaints. You can see, I'm not sure 2015 why that number is different than the others, but from 2016 to 2020, outside of 2018 popping back up a little bit, it's been remarkably consistent with a little less than 4 flights a week. But it is something we track and is on our website if community members would want to go there. I think the other items that Tony mentioned, the Morrison Bay fig tree and the numerous oak trees on the site, they continue to be monitored and maintained. They're doing well. I think he noted that we'd been able to divert roughly 94% of all waste from on the project, and I think the number was just under 3% actually ended up in a landfill. We continue to monitor neighborhood complaints, which have been very few and far between. There were no complaints in 2020. We had the one complaint in 2019, which you mentioned, which was a flat tire that a community member thought they picked up a piece of metal on Pueblo Street. We did try to contact the number that was left for us on the hotline, and we never were able to make contact with the person that lodged the complaint. The majority of I'll say the scope of this project stretching back to 2005 when it broke ground, that was noticeable to the community per se, concluded in 2018 when we completed what we know as phase 6. The last 3 years have been, interior remodels, seismic upgrades, and the limited sort of site work that we see on the corner of Pueblo and Bath, on the 300 West Pueblo block. So I'll say after 16 years, we're excited to see the completion of this project in the next few days. And that concludes my remarks on the annual report of construction status at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. You can go ahead and mute yourself at this time, and I'm going to ask Ms. DeBusk to come back and tell us if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on this item. If so, I'll ask my colleagues to rejoin by video.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. And for the public, if you would like to speak on this item, please click the raise lower hand icon that's on the control panel. And a red arrow pointed down indicates that you would like, that your hand is raised. At this time, I do not see any members of the public with their hand raised. Ms. Fennessy, have we received any written correspondence on this item?
We did not receive any written correspondence on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. And we still have no raised hands, so we will close
Okay.
public comment.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. Okay, so it's back to the commission with questions and comments if you'd like to roll them all together. Again, this is a discussion item, and as my colleagues are coming on screen, just a recap reminder for those commissioners don't have this significant history that some of us have had with this. If you want background information, I would recommend you meet with staff. But for today, if there's anything regarding the update and looking ahead, welcome those questions and comments. Commissioner Wiscombe, did you want to go first? Of Mr.
Sure, Madam
Henderson
Chair.
or Mr. Baumann or Mr. Baumann?
Sure, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. You said questions or comments. So
Sure.
I just wanted to say this is, my 5th year, so my 4th presentation of this project. And I continue to be with every year impressed at the professionalism and the concern for the community while this project's going on. I haven't been inside, thank goodness. but I will say that the courtyards and the landscaping and the stonework are all beautiful. It's really a marvel to see. This is such a special facility in our city. I want to commend Cottage Hospital on their recycling efforts. 94% at solid waste diversion since 2005 is absolutely just wonderful to see. And I know every year they've had just great numbers on that. The tree care, they've done a magnificent job with that. And I know we have conditions of approval for the tree care, but they've obviously committed to that and kept up with that. So the Morton Bay fig and the oak trees stay healthy. And the last thing is, the part that I see are the public right-of-way improvements, and they're beautiful. So I think we can all be proud of this facility, and I thank Cottage Hospital for coming to us every year with their updates and their continued success. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge, questions and comments? You're muted, Commissioner Lodge.
as usual. Mr. Henderson answered the one question, but I'm still curious, that the one question that I had, and that is why there was almost a 1/2 drop in number of helicopter landings, about which there was a lot of community objection at the time, between 2015 and 2016. Any speculation, Mr. Hendrickson? Made me wonder if some other facility with a helicopter landing pad opened over that.
I do not have any speculation. That number sort of stood out to me. I can tell you that programmatically, the services offered at Cottage have not changed. You know, we're still level 1 trauma. We're still stroke certified. We're still sort of the regional hub for a lot of serious healthcare events. So I would need to, I would be curious myself to see what 13 and 14 looked like. But I don't know why that year sort of stood out.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to point out that the image that's on the screen now is not what was the final design for the entry area, the glass area. If you go by and take a look, it's different. And I'd like to concur with Commissioner Wiscombe's comments. It's been very impressive the way this major project has been carried out over the years. So I am a little puzzled as to why there is so much lawn in the new landscaping, which looks very attractive, but in these drought days, but it looks very attractive. So there's only one entrance for the general public now, the one on Pueblo, the one that we see in the image? Unless you're going to the ER.
Correct. We have an emergency department entrance, and we have the entrance at 400 West Pueblo.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Thank you. And as other commissioners come online, Mr. Henderson, would you, for those who are not familiar with the acronym OSHPD, could you let all of the commissioners know what that stands for, please? Mr. Henderson, are you still with us?
Yes, sorry. I was in between clicking the mute button and realized I had clicked the wrong way. It is the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development.
Very good. So much interaction with and obligatory compliance with that California state office.
Yes.
Okay. Colleagues, other questions or comments, please, for Mr. Henderson? Please don't be shy. One of the largest projects in modern history in our city. Commissioner Reed?
I don't really have any comments. I'm just proud that we have arguably the most beautiful hospital in the world. It's amazing. And to see those structural retrofits, modifications, my goodness. It's cool to see and neat to realize what keeps people safe in a disaster. I mean, that's serious. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Bonderson, questions, comments?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add my my personal joy in seeing a project like this come so far and on time. I think that the statement that has impressed me most, both in the staff report but also in our presentation, is how steadily this project has moved forward and how closely it has met its timeline goals, especially when you think about a project that is so big and has so many moving parts. It's always very nice to see that the program that was put into place has maintained the direction and has hit ultimately few potholes. Every project has problems, but it looks like this has really set a standard for us, and it's something we should be proud of in our community. Whenever we look at projects which have so many phases over the course of so many years, it is often nearly impossible to stay on time and on track. So when we hear that, it's something that we should all be very proud of as a community. And we really owe a lot of thanks to everyone who's been involved in this project throughout all the moving pieces. So I'm looking forward to future projects in our community that follow this level of expectation. And this project has really set a standard that I believe we should all look forward to having future projects follow in the future. Thank you for everybody involved, for all the hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Any other commissioners before I ask Vice Chair Escobedo if he has questions and comments? Okay, why don't we turn to you, Vice Chair Escobedo, if you would like to offer some thoughts or ask any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not too much. I'll just echo the comments of my fellow commissioners and say congratulations on a job well done. And I applaud you. 94% of solid waste diversion is huge. And so congratulations, great job, and really proud to have Cottage in our community.
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. Before I comment, I'll wait to see if anybody else would like to come online. I don't want to get ahead of you if you do. Okay, I don't see any other cameras on. Well, kind of by way of looking back to look forward, this update is a bit nostalgic for me, having begun serving on the commission in January of 2010. I've had the fortune of experiencing many of these updates, and in fact was part of the early hard hat tour as the main building was being renovated. We also got to view the new helipad on the rooftop, and it was an engineering marvel to behold. Clearly we understood, as Mr. Henderson referenced OSHPD, the state regulations for hospitals have a very high bar. And fortunately for us, we have the kind of community philanthropic commitment and the type of top-notch management team at Cottage to make this a reality. Many other communities of our size, that is, roughly 90,000 residents, really haven't seen this come to fruition, this type of a healthcare facility marvel. So I want to acknowledge that. And early on, as one or more commissioners referenced, there were neighborhood concerns. They were very quickly identified and resolved. So that level of sensitivity and neighborhood concern was evident among Cottage management. And I had some firsthand experience with that since I lived in that neighborhood at the time. I also want to echo what Commissioner Bonderson said, that this really sets a standard for our community. I believe I've said that in past updates, but it certainly warrants it again today. And my goodness, with only one flat tire in a year, I was reflecting back to when I lived in San Francisco, and there was a lot of construction in downtown San Francisco over the years. I lived there and worked there, and I think one point I must have had a flat tire a month. So to have one flat tire for one individual for a year is pretty remarkable. So with that, I just want to commend everybody involved, including the neighbors. The neighbors have followed the construction. There has been some disruption, noise and otherwise, but I think that the community recognized that if we pull together, and with Cottage management being of a high level of responsiveness and accountability, we can make something like this happen embedded right within a residential neighborhood. That's what's really difficult for us as we face sensitive needed balanced growth in our community. How do we do that in a highly built out city? I think this is an example of how we can and should be looking to do that, where we're all working in partnership, collaboration towards a common goal. So I'm very pleased. And again, it's a bit nostalgic for me being in my last year as a planning commissioner. So I'm so grateful to have been a part of this, just watching it be shepherded through. So I don't see any other cameras on. I know that we don't need to take any action. It's a discussion item. And I think, Mr. Henderson, you're joining us just by audio today, if I'm correct. I would have you come on the screen so we can see you and express our appreciation, but I think you've heard from us today. If you could just verbally acknowledge that you've heard all the commissioners, that'd be helpful.
Thank you for all the kind words. It's been a project here at Cottage that's outlived some careers, including Ron Viscaro, who led it for for its existence. It's something we're really proud of. We've had a lot of really good people work on the project. We've had a commitment from the neighborhood, from the city, from OSHPD, everybody that sort of helped make this a reality. So thank you for all the kind words, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Henderson. With that, I think we're ready to conclude this item unless staff needs anything else from us. But again, it was just a discussion item. And for those commissioners continuing on, I'm sure you'll hear the next and perhaps final update when it comes time for that. So we didn't have any public comment when we opened the item. Ms. DeBusk, was that screen that just flashed on because we have a public commenter and we didn't know that earlier, or are we concluded now with this item?
Chair Schwartz, I'm not sure why the screen came on, but there is someone with their hand raised, so may want to ask if it was for this item. Wallace Piat, I will unmute you and let me know if you are here to speak on this item or the next item. Wallace, you are.
No, I'm on the next one. No, I'm on the 11 Anacapa. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool. I'm glad it works.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Busk. So let's do this. I think the applicant for our next item would like a little bit of prep time to make sure we have everything in place technologically. So let's come back at 2 o'clock. We're just going to take a 10-minute break to allow the setup of our next and final item. And we'll all be back right at 2 o'clock. Thank you. for June 3rd, 2021. And at this time, I would like to ask Vice Chair Escobedo to come online. Welcome back, our Vice Chair. And we're going to begin with our presentations, first with a staff presentation. And we'll wait to see which staff member is going to join us. Once again, we have Mr. Bauman with us to do that. And then we're going to go to the applicant for their, or applicant team possibly for their presentation. And then following that, we'll go to public comment if there is any, and then back to the commission. But first, let me read this item into the record. This is a new item. It's an application of Jarrett Gorin, Vanguard Planning, LLC, for Hannah Beachside, LLC, owner of 11 Anacapa Street. So with that, Mr. Bauman, please go ahead with your presentation to us today.
Okay, thank you, Chair Schwartz. Hello again, Commissioners. This is an item at 11 Anacapa Street. It's a request for a coastal development permit and a parking modification. Next slide, please. The purpose of the hearing today is for the Commission to consider the coastal development permit and parking modification for a proposed intensification of uses of the existing building and the modification of parking for those proposed uses. Next slide, please. This is an aerial image and sort of vicinity map. You can see the project's located just north of East Cabrillo Boulevard between Helena Avenue and Anacapa Street. Where that word site is, that's the roof of the building. It's a square 100 foot by 100 foot building. It's been there, I forget how many years, possibly since the 1940s or so. It was originally a warehouse building. Just nothing fancy. Over the years, it's had lots of different uses, permitted and permitted. And Helena Street frontage or elevation of the building is very well known as being a very unique, very iconic building in the Funk Zone with a lot of character. So that building or that elevation is proposed to remain. Several of the commissioners probably remember a similar project in 2019. That was also for a large tenant improvement for the Beer Garden restaurant. So the project today is similar to that in a lot of ways, where it's another large tenant improvement going from storage use to visitor serving uses with an increase in the parking requirement. Next slide, please. And in the staff report, we discuss a lot of parking statistics on the parking required and the parking demand and the parking provided. But as I was rereading it, I could see where you could possibly be confused about the references to 29 East Cabrillo Boulevard. As we saw in that aerial photograph, the 11 Anacapa Street, you can see in this image, we're looking from Anacapa Street and East Cabrillo Boulevard is over to the left side of the image. But the building in the far background is 11 Anacapa Street. And the yellow line I indicated there is the property line. So 29 East Cabrillo, the building is right against the property line. And that parking lot you see, or that drive aisle where you see a drive lane and angled parking along one side, all that is on the 11 Anacapa Street property, but that parking lot is, it serves the 29 East Cabrillo Boulevard building, with the exception at the very far end of that row of angled parking, the furthest 3 parking spaces closest to Helena Avenue are for the use of the 11 Anacapa Street building. So I just put this slide in for clarification in case anybody had questions about that. Next slide, please. So the project involves, it's kind of an adaptive reuse, I guess you could say. It's the renovation of this multi-tenant old non-residential building, changing from storage use floor area to visitor serving OC zone compliant use. And the project would convert 1,739 square feet to a new winery and wine tasting business. The project includes construction of a new roof deck with the wine tasting bar on the roof. And there's a bar up there, a small storage area that technically makes it a second story, and also some additional floor area. This storage area would serve the bar. And there's a new elevator, partially protruding from the building, but mostly contained within the building footprint, and a new exterior stair. So that change of warehouse to wine tasting means the parking requirement goes up, and also the parking demand goes up. And the previous project had just really maxed out the available ability to park cars on a surface parking lot, just park in the parking lot. So this project includes a new mechanical parking stacker in the parking lot to provide additional parking, and also revised valet operations. Next slide, please. This is a site plan from the plan set, and the multi-colors, it's a little bit hard to tell what's building and what's parking lot, but the lighter gray areas are like ground level, and the multicolored areas indicate the different tenants. So that kind of yellow mustard color is the 2019 project that was for the Beer Garden restaurant, and to the like above and to the right of that Beer Garden, outside of that space, is a large outdoor dining area with outdoor seating. And then to the left, along Helena, the green area is the new conversion to the new wine tasting business. And they're also a winery, so the blue floor area shows where they would do some storage for wine barrels, etc. The 2019 project did a major accessibility improvement for this building, because it's all raised floor, where you could just, in the past, you just back up a truck and you load and unload a truck. So it didn't have any steps or anything on the old warehouse doors. But the way the grade is configured, there's a new, well, the 2019 project provided a new main entry, like a multi-tenant entry from the Anacapa Street side parking lot. And that's kind of the orange area, which is common area for the tenants. There's common restrooms in there and a bike storage room. And that provides interior accessibility into all the tenant spaces. And then looking at the site plan, down in the lower right side of the site plan, close to Anacapa Street, I've highlighted with that red outline where 9 existing surface parking spaces would be replaced with a new 3-level parking stacking machine that holds 22 cars. So it's basically putting 22 cars where there was previously 9. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick, the applicant will go in detail about this parking stacker structure. This is just a quick slide I snuck in there just to give you an idea what that is. The project's been reviewed by the ABR, and there's more review to be done with the ABR to work out the final design, but this was a concept that the ABR was responsive to. The project kind of disguises or makes the parking stacker look a little more compatible in the vicinity with an old, like, warehouse industrial design scheme. On this side facing north, facing the parking lot, it's still visibly a parking stacker machine. Next slide, please. This is, again, from the plan set. This is a view of the proposed roof deck. So we're looking straight down on the roof. The upper part of the image is the Helena Street and north corner of the property, where there's going to be a new exterior stair. And it's not shown here, but right next to that stair is a new, well, no, it is shown. Like to the upper right of the image is the elevator tower. And then just below that, the storage room. And then kind of in this, toward the center of the image, I don't know if you can make out the bar that's part of the roof deck. The two square things with plants around it, those are new, like pyramid-shaped skylights. They'll give some natural light into the new tenant spaces downstairs. And they've got the seating plan. Just while we're here, I'd like to describe how, we work with the applicant. We appreciate the applicant working with staff on the seating plan, because we'll describe later the requested parking modification, because wine tasting, similar to the 2019 restaurant, this new wine tasting use has a parking requirement per number of seats. So we worked with the applicant on the seating plan, looking carefully at the number of seats, because that determines the number of required parking spaces. So this shows how there's some planting outside of the red rectangle that I drew. That's new planting that surrounds the roof deck, but the red area is where the deck railing is. So that's the area combined where people can access that. And then the rest of it's just for appearance, just to screen it or give it a nice appearance with the landscaping. Next slide, please.
Mr. Baumann, do you have a pointer or a mouse that would allow you to zero in on some of the details you're verbally describing that would also be captured on video? I think that would be helpful if you have that capability.
Okay, I don't, but I could direct Mr. Russell to do that. Do you want me to go back to anything in particular that I might have missed?
Let's not go back. I just,
Okay.
On a going forward basis, I think the coordination between staff and whether it's Mr. Bolton or Mr. Russell in doing that, I think will help us follow your verbal presentation and then also capture it on the televised audio recording. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Will do. This is just quickly on the subject of the roof deck. This is just an elevation view on the Helena Street side. No one would actually see this view because it's an elevation drawing. In fact, when you're standing on this stretch of Helena Street looking up, the sight line wouldn't allow a view of the roof deck. It's kind of foreshortened in this image, whereas it's, the Helena Street facade of the building is close, and the elevator tower that you see there and the bar and the canopy roof over the bar would be kind of further in the background. Same thing with the railing. It's set back quite a bit from the Helena Street facade. This is just a quick image of what that looks like. Next slide, please. So, discussing the coastal development permit, it's required for a change in intensity of land use. In this case, it's measured basically by the increase in the parking requirement, going from warehouse to wine tasting, where we have that 1 parking space per 3 seat parking requirement, whereas the warehouse had depending on exactly what it was, I can't remember, either 1 parking space per 5,000 square feet or 1 space per 500 square feet. So for the coastal development permit, the relevant policy considerations for the commission are related to coastal access and scenic and visual qualities, and maybe not so much non-conforming development. I took another look at that. The building's not really non-conforming. There are some non-conforming uses historically. Some of those would remain. The wine storage would remain a non-conforming use, but it's mostly changing from non-conforming to the conforming visitor serving use. The scenic and visual qualities, that's kind of in the realm of the ABR. The applicants provided some photo simulations to show the commission what the visual impacts might be, if any, for consideration of that policy consistency. And of course, coastal access is largely dealing with parking. So the the coastal access policies for the coastal development permit kind of go hand in hand with the request for the parking modification, where parking should be provided to meet demand on the project site and not cause an increase in demand for parking on the streets where people might want to park, for example, on Anacapa Street to visit the beach or go to Storms Wharf or whatever. So the project's designed to provide all the needed parking to meet the parking demand on site. Next slide, please. And continuing with that parking modification, we mentioned it's going to a more intense wine tasting use. So the additional seating, all the new seating for wine tasting, both in the building and the tenant area of the building, plus the whole roof deck, all that increases the number. Well, that increase in number of seats increases not only the parking requirement, but the demand for parking, of course. So I mentioned earlier how the mechanical parking, it's called a puzzle stacker because of the way it shifts the cars around and maneuver them up and down into the 3 parking levels. But that is included in the project to increase the parking provided so that the increased demand is met with increased parking provided. The valet parking operations are changed somewhat. The parking stackers entirely operated by valets. There's no self-parking in that. Early in the morning when employees are arriving before business operations, there are surface parking spaces there. The 3 I mentioned earlier on that parking area with the angled parking, the 3 parking spaces in that parking lot are surface parking for self-parking. Employees could park there, as well as 5 surface parking spaces that are striped in the main parking lot behind the 11 Anacapa Street. But even with the additional parking provided by the parking stacker, the parking requirement is not fully met, and a modification is requested, kind of expanding on the parking modification that was approved in 2019. And the parking demand study kind of followed that same methodology in determining the demand and kind of expanded on that to account for the new seats, basically. Next slide, please. This slide shows the parking requirement and the parking demand and the parking proposed for the 11 Anacapa building, leaving out the 29 East Cabrillo building altogether. So the requirement for the beer garden, the Sunstone Winery, all the other tenants in the building, all that combined, the zoning ordinance parking requirement is 68 spaces. And the parking demand study found that with visitors arriving by other modes of transportation, not necessarily driving cars here. Also, maybe they've been visiting other businesses in the Funk Zone, so they're walking from place to place in the Funk Zone, not necessarily needing to move their car to here when they come here. And also accounting for different businesses being more or less busy at different times of the day, so it's a shared parking demand. And the peak, the maximum demand occurs on weekdays around noon, and that's 45 spaces. I just mentioned how there are 8 striped spaces available when there's no valet operating. And then the proposal is to have 45 spaces with valets operating during business hours. Next slide, please. So the parking is proposed in accordance with the demand as provided in that shared parking demand study. And it's based on the mix of existing uses. One part of the methodology used in the parking demand study was based on a city study that was done in the Funk Zone that showed, it was a sort of a poll that interviewed people that were in the Funk Zone and they were asking respondents how they arrived, and 35% of the respondents arrived via alternative modes other than driving cars. So the shared parking demand study incorporated that 35% reduction in parking to the way they found that people arrive at the Funk Zone. And the project includes necessary valet operations. You know, the parking provided depends on valet parking the cars because they're stacked in the surface lot and parked in the parking stacker. So it depends upon valet operations during business hours. Next slide, please. Environmental review. The project we found is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA section 15301, which applies to existing facilities. And that's for the site alterations, basically the project description. And also section 15305, which is called minor alterations in land use limitations. And that's a CEQA exemption for the modification. Next slide, please. The required finding, there's only one finding to approve the parking modification. It's that the modification will not be inconsistent with the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance and will not cause an increase in the demand for parking space or loading space in the immediate area. And that comes from our Title 28 zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. And the required findings to approve the coastal development permit are that the project is consistent with the California Coastal Act. In this case, the relevant part of that is maintenance and enhancement of public access to the coast. And the project also needs to be consistent with the city's coastal land use plan. The most relevant policies there are 2.1-15 for maintenance and enhancement of public access, 3.1-29 off-street parking for new development and substantial redevelopment is provided on site basically. And policy 2.1-19, again, I took another look at that, and the non-conforming aspect is not, well, I guess it's relevant to the extent that the project is becoming non-conforming in terms of use. The building itself is not non-conforming. Next slide, please. So with all that, a staff recommendation to the commission is that you consider the required findings as discussed in the staff report and approve the coastal development permit and the parking modification with the conditions of approval attached to the staff report. So this concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baumann. And at this time, I'm going to see if Mr. Gorin, on behalf of the applicant, would like to come online. And while we're waiting for him to do that and to have that PowerPoint loaded, Ms. DeBusk, I want to ask you if we have everything in order now in terms of the members of the public who would like to speak being able to get in queue. Could you give us a status before we actually will be going to public comment in a bit?
Yes, Chair Schwartz, to my knowledge, everyone that wants to be on the webinar is. We have at least, I think, 6 people that have already raised their hand to speak.
Okay, Ms. DeBusk, is there, I think you mentioned to me that there's a phone number for support if somebody is having technical difficulty getting into the queue. Could you please give that phone number out now?
Sure, Chair Schwartz. The support line for LogMeIn, which is the company that supports the GoToWebinar platform, their support line phone number is 877-582-7011. So again, that's 877-582-7011. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. I'll give out that number in a little bit in case there are still any technical difficulties after Mr. Gorin's presentation. Welcome, Mr. Gorin. We do not have a timer on today. You're sort of the newest applicant where it turns out that we don't have our clock going. So I'm just going to keep light tabs, although I know that your presentation is fairly brief. So with that, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Schwartz, members of the commission. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, and I represent the property owner Hannah Beach LLC and also Sunstone Winery. So I'm not going to rehash things that Tony just covered really well in his presentation. I'm going to show you some more details about some other things we have. So your commission looked at a coastal development permit here back in 2019. That got appealed, but it was ultimately approved, and it's now been built out. And so you can see our site here in the middle, sort of towards the bottom of the photograph. You can see the new parking lot with the pavers and everything else. Go ahead and give me the next slide. You're going backwards. Yeah, there we go. Here's another aerial straight down on the property. So you can, this basically looks like what our plans looked like from the previous project. It literally looks exactly the same on the ground as it did when we reviewed it. And the one thing you'll see here that's a little different is we've got some outdoor seating due to COVID into the parking area, but that temporarily affects 2 parking spaces, but that is just temporary due to COVID situations. So let's go ahead to the next slide. This is a ground view of the brewery. That was the biggest change out in the building and sort of the thing that spurred the whole previous project. So here it is in real life. And here you can also see a big portion of one of our accessibility improvements. On the right hand of the photo here is the walkway that goes from Anacapa all the way through to Helena Street. And you're looking at a little bit of the ramp there. And here's the grade difference that Mr. Bowman was talking about with, how this ramp gets up to the floor elevation of that building. Next slide. This is another view of that, just the walkway and the access improvement. Next slide. So here's the other side of the property and the other accessibility improvement we have coming up from Anacapa Street that goes along and drops you off in front of Lovelorn. Next slide. So now I'll go over the proposed improvements of this project. So this is the proposed site plan. And can we have the next slide, please? But I just need the next slide. I don't need it to be blown up. There we go. The corner of the building here is where Sunstone Winery is going to go in. And right now, this is sort of I'm not even sure what was in there right now. It's a big vacant sort of warehouse space. And it's not a conforming use right now, to my understanding. And you can see the green area there is going to be mostly the tasting room. And then these blue areas here are wine storage, and that would remain storage. And then the orange right here is common restrooms that serve the building, and also a big chunk of that orange space is our indoor bicycle parking area. We're meeting our bicycle parking outside, but we're providing substantial additional secured bicycle parking inside, mostly for use by employees, but it's also open to everyone. Next slide. Here's the interior of what the winery is going to look like, and it's basically taking advantage of the full height of the building. In the back there, you can see the stairs going up to the roof deck. That's our interior stairs, and then through the windows, you can see our exterior stairs, and we have to have 2 pairs of staircases for fire egress requirements, and they have to be a certain distance apart from each other up on the deck, and so this is how we're doing that. Next slide. So here's what it looks like from the outside, from the ground, looking up at it. What you can't see in the elevations that Mr. Bowman was talking about, you can see it here in 3 dimensions. that the roof deck railing is set back from the edge of that roof, and the elevator tower and the bar canopy structure are set really far back from the edge of that roof on Helena. So just in terms of just basic geometry, you can't really see these features from Helena Street just due to where the existing roof of the building intersecting your line of sight. You would see the staircase and you'd see the elevator tower coming up, and we think those are attractive additions to the building, and we are looking for some opportunities for some signage possibly or art on the elevator tower. But we think this is going to be a nice addition to the building. The architectural board of review was really focused on this and making sure that we carried forward the sort of funky industrial nature of the building onto these new improvements. And they felt pretty comfortable that we had done that successfully before we came here. Next slide. So here's a higher up view looking at what this deck looks like, and see we'd have some planners out on it. There's a couple chunks out of the middle of the deck that are the skylights that Mr. Bowman pointed out. And then you can just see how the bar and covered area is towards the back there, and then people are out around the edges. And you really have views all over the place from here, towards the mountains, the beach, out over State Street, towards the Mesa. It's going to be a really nice space. Next slide. So the other big improvement that's part of this project is the car parker. So back when I presented this project to you originally, the first CDP back in 2019, I'd said that if the package of uses in this building changed, that we would need to address parking requirements again if tenants changed out or we got new, more intensive tenants. And so that's exactly what's happening now. We have a new, more intensive tenant, so we have to come up with parking in above and beyond what we already have here to serve that tenant. So given the limited space and the water table and everything else, the way that we can do that is with this above ground car parker. So let's look at the next slide. This is just a straight on elevation from Anacapa Street. And I wanted to show this one because it is a 3-level car parker, but that's 3 levels of cars. It's not 3 stories high. So what you can see is the relative height of the car parker on the left there and the existing building. And so it's at the very peak of the roof, it's about the same height as the roof on the existing building, the way it is right now. Next slide. So here are some more realistic views of what this will look like. You can see that we've put we call it a shell. We put a shell around this thing. And we really spent a long time working on how we could make this look like a building that we wanted this to look like it was a building that was there in the funk zone, and then it got repurposed into a car parker rather than being a new building. And so what we've designed here is a building that's really similar to what you would see in a lumber storage yard or something like that, which, as it happens, is something that might have been here, realistically, because there was a rail line that used to come right through here, and these are the buildings they put next to rail lines to store the lumber in. So it worked out really well that we had that history there, and that we could carry that style forward with this building. Next slide. So this is the other side of the building where the cars go in and out on the ground floor. And on this side, we wanted to cover it up a little bit, but not entirely. So we're using sort of a screen material that you can see light and everything come through that. You can see the cars moving around in there. The car parker isn't something we're trying to hide. We think it's going to be a cool feature. We think people are going to enjoy seeing this and watching it work when they come visit the site and when they're walking by the site. And so you can just see how this fits in and, sort of completes our building footprint on the site and brings the buildings up closer to the street, which we feel is kind of engaging. And then let's take a look at the next slide. So here's what it would look like at night. And so what you can see here is there's lighting in the car parker. And this is something we talked about with the ABR, but we've got some cool exposed trusses and things up in the roof. And so, this lets light go up in there and you can kind of see, the mechanics of it in there and the structure of the building. And we're really happy with how this turned out. And we're getting a little assist from an existing street light over there on the outside of the building. You can also see there's some opportunities for murals and art on there, which we're not proposing specific murals as part of this project, but we are going to pursue those to be located on this building. And I love this image because it's a really warm and inviting place. If I was walking by here, I would want to go in there and visit this place. Next slide. So let's talk about the parking modification. Mr. Bowman walked you through it. I have a site plan here where I've outlined the actual parking spaces so you can see them a little bit more distinctly from the deck and the landscaping. So this is the parking that we have right now, and it's all surface parking. And so we got those 3 spots up there by Helena and then the rest of it in our surface lot. And next slide. So the difference here is basically the car parker going in there. And again, that eliminates surface parking, but it replaces it with a lot more parking in the parking lift itself. Next slide. So Mr. Bowman showed you some of the seating plans. These were basically,
Excuse me,
we
Mr.
spent a
Gorn,
long,
Madam
Yeah.
Chair. Can you do that again, Mr. Gorn? Do you have a pointer or a mouse, or is it just, do we not have that ability?
do not have a pointer or a mouse or that ability.
Does somebody on the city side, can they roll a pointer? You said 3 parking spaces on Helena, and then
Yeah, right.
it's a
Those
pretty
are the 3.
complicated site because it's got shared use and all that stuff. So if you could maybe go a little slower, I'd appreciate it on that.
Okay, so in the purple polygon down there, those 3 spaces are to serve the 11 Anacapa building. That's this one big long parking lot that's there, but I believe 22 spaces in that lot are dedicated to the Cabrillo project where Flor de Maíz and Oku are. Next slide. So the seating plans, we spent a long time with planning staff on this, and we've seen people come in with huge spaces and putting a couple of 2 top tables in there and saying, see, we've only got 8 seats, so, we don't need any parking. So we spent a long time coming up with realistic plans, and the gray area here that you see is walkway space. It's 44 inches wide, which is the minimum that you have to keep open. And then next slide. We went to the extent of actually labeling each seat. So each bar stool at the bar has a number, and this is how we came up with the number of seats to generate what the ordinance parking requirement is for the project. Next slide. So this is a table out of the current parking demand study, and this study is exactly the same methodology as what was used with the study that the city looked at when it approved our current development that's out there. And what our engineer did is just changed the square footages and uses to match what we're proposing now and figured out the new parking rates. So what I've highlighted here is we have 2 conditions on the site. We have a condition when there's no valet operations, so it'd be like early in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day on weekdays. And then we have a condition where we've got valet operations, which is anytime either the brewery or the winery is in operation, we have to have a valet on site. So just on this one here, when the restaurant and the winery aren't operating, the peak daytime demand would only be 8 spaces, and it'd be 7 spaces on a weekend. So that's only with things like Love Warren operating or like the skate shop or those types of things. So can I have the next slide? So in that case here, when there's no valet operations, the peak parking demand at any time would be 8 spaces, and that's what we have as surface spaces that anybody can park in. Next slide. So when they are operating and the valets are on site, this is where you get to the full 45 space demand on daytime peak demand. And we have 45 spaces to accommodate that demand. And then you can see that on the weekend, the peak demand actually drops to 40 spaces. And so we have a couple of extra spaces then. And it's a little counterintuitive, but the reason it drops is there's less traffic to the retail spaces on the weekends. And then, there's maybe a little more traffic to the restaurant spaces, but this is how it all balances out. Next slide. So this just shows you the total spaces are 45 and our peak parking demand's 45 and the peak weekend demand's 40. So we're covering our demand on the site. And then the orange areas that are highlighted on the site plan here, those are all of the spaces that are available for valet parking. So there's the double stacked area in the big lot, and then there's the entire car parker, and then there's all of the spaces in front of the car parker as well, that the valets can stack vehicles. And then we still have those 3 spaces over there towards Helena. Next slide. So now we'll just go through sort of the visual impacts of the project. And we talked with the planning staff about the best locations to take these views, and that's what we'll show you here. So this is Helena Street looking towards the beach in Cabrillo. And so there's our existing building. Next slide. And here's what it would look like with the project in place. And the way that we create these is we have a digital model of the existing building and all of the proposed improvements. And so we can rotate that model and scale it any way we want to. And so what we'll do is we'll take a photo and rotate the model and scale it so that lines on our digital model, such as like the edge of the roof there, line up and precisely match what's in our photo. So we know we're getting an accurate view of the digital model because the parts of it that match the stuff in the photo, they all line up perfectly. So that's what it would look like to see the roof deck and the stairs and the elevator tower from Helena Street. Next, please. So this is looking back down Helena Street from across the street on Cabrillo. So a public view that people might have over to the project from a prominent viewing area. So you can see our project there sort of in the dead center of the photo. Next slide. So this is us putting our digital model in over the project. So it changes the colors around, but really the point of this is to show the massing and where things are located and what, if any, views are blocked. And you can see here, it doesn't really change anything significantly from this viewpoint. Next slide. So this is looking down Anacapa Street from the corner of Cabrillo and Anacapa. It's right in front of the fish house, looking straight at our parking lot. Next slide. So here's where the parking structure fits into that view. And you see it. We've got some existing trees there, which are some really nice large screening already in place. But you can see that the views, what it's blocking a view of really is the Beacons building back there. It's not tall enough to significantly impact any mountain views or I mean, this isn't really a significant viewing location, but even so, it just doesn't really block any views of anything that's really important in our policies. Next slide, please. So here's the view where we'll have the largest visual impact. So this is looking basically at our Anacapa Street frontage from right across the street. And let's have the next slide. So that's the parking structure and the roof deck and elevator tower inserted onto that view. So yes, there's going to be a prominent view of that parking machine building, but we've designed that to make it fit in with the neighborhood. Make it look like an industrial building. And like I said before, I think this is going to be something that's interesting for people to look at. It really just blocks the view of the back of the 19 Cabrillo Street building and a parking lot. So I like this view. So that's how everything looks. The roof deck is not really a significant feature of this view, although you can see a little bit at the edge of the roof, but that's how our project looks. So with that, next slide. That's my presentation, and I can answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Gorin. I think what we'll do now is we're going to go to public comment. And again, I want to give the public the toll-free number that Ms. DeBus gave out earlier, which is a number to the vendor LogMeIn, the tech vendor. In case you are having any difficulties getting into the queue, we want to make sure that every member of the public who wishes to speak is able to. That phone number again is 877-582-7011. How are we looking on public commenters in queue, Ms. DeBusk?
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. It looks like we have about 12 public speakers, so I will start calling on the speaker, and then I'll let you know who the next two speakers behind that person will be. For the public to make a public comment, to let me know that you're interested, please click the raise lower hand icon that's on the control panel of the GoToWebinar system. I will notify you when it's your turn to speak, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. No time may be donated.
Before we begin, let's ask the rest of the Planning Commission to please come online so that we're all visible during public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. No time may be donated from another speaker. So the hand with the red arrow pointed down means that your hand has been raised. Our first speaker will be Aaron Running, followed by Bianca Arce, and then Carl Braid. Aaron Running, you have been unmuted and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you for, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, perfect. I wanted to speak in support of the wine tasting project. There's been a lot of buzz at the beer garden about the rooftop deck going in. So I think it'll be a great addition to the space. And has been operating for about 3 months. Most of my patrons are coming as way of walking, Uber, or bicycle. Parking really has not been an issue whatsoever. We've probably had more parking than required with that valet going. So as far as what we've seen so far with usage from my space, I think that this will just be a great addition, and with the stackable parking will easily meet the demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Running.
Our next speaker will be Bianca Arce, followed by Carl Braid. Bianca, I've unmuted you and you have 2 minutes. And please correct me if I pronounced your name wrong.
No, that was it. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so I am very excited and supportive of this project. I feel like this is exactly what Santa Barbara needs. The space and the location are ideal. I currently work at Flor de Maíz as a waitress right now. And this would be a huge asset, I feel like, to the locals, to the out-of-towners. I often get to know my guests very well, and they're often asking me where I can send them to. I send them to local areas, but I feel like this would definitely bring a new spark to the Funk Zone, especially the rooftop attraction. I did hear Sunstone is going to be going in there, and big fan of Sunstone myself, my friends, families, and all of the guests that I get to know. I always send them over there. Great product, great ambiance, great staff. So that's definitely exciting that they would be joining the Funk Zone. I do notice that a lot of people from out of town kind of walk in from the hotel, take Ubers, Lyfts, maybe even bike in. So I don't foresee this be a big problem with traffic. Yeah, I think ideally this is just going to bring a lot of life and a new spark to the funk zone, which is super excited about.
Thank you, Ms. Ors.
Our next speaker will be Carl Braid, followed by Cindy Van Wingerden, and then Ed St. George. Carl Braid, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes once you unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm a longtime resident, grew up here in Santa Barbara, and actually used to work at the Wright Building right across the street. So the view I had was just fantastic, looking to the harbor. So I'm just really excited about, you know, a rooftop that can, you know, really give, you know, both tourists and Santa Barbara locals a view of the harbor that pretty much can't get anywhere else in that sort of funk zone area, except the California Hotel, which is private in most cases. So yeah, it's absolute welcome, you know, new opportunity for the area. The wines are fantastic, you know, with the urban wine trail. And I know a lot of people that will, you know, come up from the train from Ventura, even cart for the day just to, you know, walk the urban wine trail. And so having this addition with the, you know, with the view is going to be fantastic. And I've never, you know, I live about a mile away. I pretty much walk over, ride my bike over on the regular, never really drive down that area. So I don't see parking being much of an issue at all.
Thank you, Mr. Braid.
Our next speaker is Cindy Van Wingerden, to be followed by Ed St. George. Cindy, I've unmuted you, so you can unmute yourself and you will have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Van Wingerden, local community member and cultivator in Carpinteria Valley. I've known Teddy Kabugo since our childhood days on the Mesa. Teddy is a stand-up man and entrepreneur who the community absolutely loves and respects. This project has been well thought out and is an innovative way of connecting the Santa Barbara Funk Zone with the San Ynez wine country. Teddy and his team have developed unique ways in their business plan and marketing plan that would spark additional interest from the Funk Zone to the valley. Sunstone's roof deck is exactly what the Funk Zone needs. I speak for many of us local folks, friends and family, when I say that we're excited to see this project succeed. It's hands down a superb project led by a great local team. So I have full support of this project and I hope that they're very successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Van Wingerden.
Our next speaker will be Ed St. George, to be followed by Jill Johnson and John Campanella. Ed, you can unmute yourself and you will have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me okay, Allison?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, hi. I'm happy everybody's really excited about the wine. I know the view down there is going to be great. Ray's kind of an inspiration for all of us developers. He's a visionary. He's not going to do anything that's in poor taste for the community. What I really want to touch on is the Parker. I would much rather see this Parker than I would a sea of asphalt. As much as I love cars, I don't like seeing parking lots. But that's my opinion. The other issue is that I do want to bring this up. I own an apartment building about, well, less than a half a mile from there. And about 4 years ago, we used to have about a 50-car wait. And so what I did is I went into business with Santa Barbara City College, and we actually rented up 3 Zip cars, parked them on my lot to try to kind of extinguish the need for more parking. Then about 3 years ago, our parking wait went to about 25 people. And then 2 years ago, we didn't have any parking wait. Last year, we did have COVID, but we still had good occupancy. We had no wait. We're fully leased up for next year. and we have about 50 parking spaces left. My point being is that less and less people are getting cars, or using cars, or utilizing cars, especially in that district. I think in 15, 20 years from now, we're going to hardly see any parking lots anymore, for that matter. You know, the average age right now of someone getting a driver's license in California is 22 years old, which is pretty astounding. So parking, I'm happy he's putting this Parker in. That can be removed at some point in the future. Don't want to see the asphalt, that's for sure. Support the project, but moreover, support the use of these Parkers throughout the city. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. St. George.
Our next speaker will be Jill Johnson, followed by John Campanella, and then John Tyne. Jill Johnson, you have been unmuted. You can unmute yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks. I'm Jill. I'm the owner of Love Warren, and I am what? Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. So I am super excited about the Sunstone Winery project. I've been on that roof, and the views, let me tell you, are so stunning that I know it's going to be an incredible addition to the Funk Zone, with all of our visitors being able to see how beautiful our city is from a different vantage point that only partially exists from the Californian and the Blue Water Grill. But it's the views are beautiful. What they've done and what they're proposing with the building is absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't be happier to have a business here in the same building with such wonderful visionaries. And I think they've done a great, great job with the design. I will also state that I do care about the view of my store and our art gallery from Anacapa. And regarding the parking structure, I have to tell you, I really agree with the last speaker. I'm down here every day, and people are walking. They're taking bikes that are provided by their hotels. They're parking at the hotels. There's a huge lot on across the street on Garden Street that is always has plenty of vacancy. And so I don't see parking being an issue down here. So I just have to state that. So I think that they did a really, really great job on the parking requirements that were passed in 2019 to accommodate the beer garden and the other restaurants in the area. But I do feel like it's ample. And I really was surprised at the 35% that they said in that parking study of people using alternative transportation than cars. I feel like it's much higher. And I really am down here every single day. So I think the parking will be ample, but the project itself is gorgeous, and I'm really excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Our next speaker will be John Campanella, to be followed by John Tyne and then Kenneth Rife. John Campanella, you can unmute yourself, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm impressed by the fact that you're going to get a vantage point for people seeing views of the harbor, which would allow both locals and visitors to see it. What's currently reserved for hotel occupants primarily. And I think one of the things that we're looking for in a coastal zone is providing cheaper alternatives for people enjoying the coast. Now, I know you're gonna have to pay to sit there and have a glass of wine, but you don't have to do it for a 2-night minimum. Okay, so I think this is gonna be much less expensive, and it's really gonna be very positive for the community. The other thing that the combination of projects has done, as we saw earlier, is provide circulation from the parking lots on Garden Street, and even though we're at the Californian, and handicap accessibility. So it's providing a public benefit that allow more people to access the blocks and parking, and also for the physically handicapped. So there's a lot of positives going on here that would really comply with a lot of the intent of the Coastal Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campanella.
Our next speaker is John Tyne, followed by Kenneth Rife. John, you have been unmuted. You can unmute yourself, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is John Tyne. I am General Counsel for Hannah Beachside LLC. And I hope you're hearing a lot of positive feedback on this. But more importantly, I hope that you're hearing that in both the staff report and Mr. Gorin's presentation, they've given you ample cause to make your 3 findings that would support this project, primarily that it is not inconsistent with the zoning ordinance, that it will not cause an increase in demand on parking. And I think that these car parkers, Mr. Mahboub and Mr. Gorin, should be really commended for that out-of-the-box thinking. They've done a beautiful job of incorporating that into the project and making it look very consistent with the funk zone. Your last finding, of course, is that it's consistent with the Coastal Act, which means that it will enhance public access to the beach. Something that's exciting about this project is that it doesn't necessarily cater to people from out of town. This does, as Mr. Campanella indicated, provide locals with an access to a rooftop venue that they otherwise might not get if they weren't a hotel guest or if they weren't staying with one of our oceanfront estates. So I think that you have plenty of support here to make your findings, and we really hope that you will do so, and then that we'll see you at this new beautiful venue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Time.
Our next speaker is Kenneth Reif, to be followed by Wallace Piot and then Peter Strauss. Kenneth Reif, you can unmute yourself. There you go, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Kenneth Reif. I am a gaucho. I moved here in 2005 to go to UCSB. And since then, I have been the director of operations for Blue Star Parking, the company that will actually be taking care of the valet and parking issues of the project, not only for the positive economic growth for the youth who will get to work at the winery and work with my team to take care of the patrons, but also because of all the additions and as everyone has mentioned, the beautiful views. Most of our patrons are locals, they're repeat customers. They've grown to love the beer garden, Oco and Flor de Mais, and the entire community that's kind of been growing around there. And I can say, as Aaron mentioned from Beer Garden, that most people who frequent Beer Garden or Skyana, which is another winery in the building, they do ride their bikes, they do walk, they carpool if they do come. And we actually also offer a bike valet, which incentivizes people riding their bikes and going green and, you know, coming, and we can lock them up in storage. That way they have a safe alternative and aren't worried about oftentimes they're very expensive bikes being messed with or stolen. And we're also more than a parking company. As someone mentioned earlier, we take care of ADA guests when their ADA parking is already full. We can accommodate people a lot closer, give them recommendations, point them around the city. It's really an asset to both locals who might be curious to find a new place, and also for out-of-towners who might need their car quickly to get to the airport before they head out, or just looking for a new experience. So we do a lot more than park cars, and we're happy to be a part of this new Lyft experience and maximize the parking for you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Reif.
Our next speaker is Wallace Piot, followed by Peter Strauss, and then Naren Porter Kazbati. Wallace Piot, you are self-muted. If you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes to speak. The hand has gone down, so perhaps no longer wants to speak. I will move to the next speaker, but we can always go. Oh, I think he's back. Wallace, if you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes.
Oh, I got it. Sorry, man. Sorry. Jeez. Anyway, are you ready?
Yes.
Ready
First
for
of all,
you. We're ready for you, Mr. Piot. Go ahead, please.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. First of all, Teddy has become a good friend, and the Sunstone Winery's idea sounds so neat and so brilliantly put together. The rooftop is going to make a big impact in our building. And in our building, meaning that I'm partners with Lovewarn, and I have my own art gallery in the same building. Anyway, he's very professional, and the whole scene looks very, very, very architecturally sound. And I think it's going to be a good thing for our building to add to more creative aspects and everything with art, retail, wine, and beer and restaurants. I do believe that we have enough parking in the surrounding parking lots, Garden Street and the beaches. I walk to my other art studio every day through the parking lot on Garden, and it's never, ever filled. And I feel like the city should alert to the fact that there is parking over there. For some reason, it's always empty. And I feel like there's other parking styles and strategies that we could, as a community, put together in a more positive way. I just want to say that I'm definitely for the project, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. And Sunstone Winery is totally welcome with open arms from us at Lovewarn and Rodeo Gallery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Piot.
Our next speaker is Peter Strauss, followed by Naren Porter Kazbadi. Peter Strauss, I don't know if you have audio at this point. Can you try unmuting yourself? For some reason, we don't have audio. Perhaps Peter Strauss, if you want to try logging off and logging back in to see if we can get you some audio, and then we'll get you up as the next speaker. So I will move on to Naren Porter Kazbadi, to be followed by Len Germano. Naren, if you can unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, how's it going? So my name's Naren Porter Kazbadi. I'm one of the owners of Lighthouse Skate Shop. We're in the same building as well, 16B Helena. And we backed the project. It's pretty awesome. Teddy's a great guy. Came by, introduced himself the old-fashioned way. Respectful. So we're really stoked to have him in. The rooftop's just amazing. So we back it. The skaters support the project. That's about it. Thank you guys so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Porter Kazbadi.
Our next speaker is Len Germano. And it looks like Peter Strauss has gone offline. We will see if we can get that back. And then after Len Germano, we have Accessible Santa Barbara. Len, if you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Len Germano. I'm a tenant also in Ray's building, owner of Skyana Wine Lounge. I just want to start by saying that I'm very much in support of this project. I feel that Sunstone will be a great new addition to the building, also complementing many other businesses within that area. I think the proposed use fits for the building are beautiful. The rooftop deck will be a major attraction. This will bring in a lot more visitors from numerous of areas. It'll definitely be very good for all the businesses around the Funk Zone. Personally, I'm not too concerned about the parking situation. From my own personal experiences, the majority of people usually either bike in, Uber, utilize Lyft, or just merely walk from hotel rooms. That being said, I don't think parking should be a major factor considering I'm moving forward with the Sunstone project. Obviously, that's my opinion. But, I've met Ted numerous of times, great guy, and I think he'll be a great new addition to the Funk Zone within our building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Germano.
Our next speaker is Accessible Santa Barbara, followed by Peter Strauss. Accessible Santa Barbara, if you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, everybody. This is Will Relling making this comment on behalf of Accessible Santa Barbara, an unincorporated nonprofit association. And as you know, there is a current CDP for this property. And as you know, the work required by the CDP has not been completed. The main aspect of that work was the destroying of the previous speaker, Mr. Germano's business. And so throughout the hearings on that CDP, it was always a bit of a mystery to us. Why was the person who owns the inaccessible second floor bar that had been built illegally, that was going to be destroyed as part of this project, speaking in favor of the project at every meeting? And so we have a serious concern. You have a CDP that was issued, the work is not finished. Is it correct to issue a new CDP or first require the work under the first CDP to be completed? Perhaps there needs to be an amended CDP rather than a new CDP. And so to have, Mr. Germano, who I'm quite sure is a hardworking and ethical and dedicated business person who might not care about accessibility because he built a second floor bar with no access at all, again, supporting the project. Now you're being told that there's a condition on this project that they'll have to get a building permit to do the demo before. But I'm wondering if that's worth the paper it's printed on. This is a CDP. It's a planning decision. The previous existing CDP was a planning decision. So I ask you to require completion of the work under the first CDP before you issue an additional CDP, especially in light of today's testimony. We just don't think that this coastal development permit, if issued, would comply with the city's local coastal program, not with the land use plan, not with the implementation plan. We also believe that the CDP would not comply with the access policies of the Coastal Act itself. Mainly, this is because of the parking modification. And
Thank you,
we
Mr.
respectfully
Relling.
Disagree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Relling.
And at this time, our final speaker will be Peter Strauss. Peter, if you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes. Peter Strauss, it looks like you are unmuted. Are you able to speak? If you hold on one moment, we're sending an audio pin so that we can get this public comment. Peter, if you enter the pin that was sent, you should be able to access the audio. While we're waiting for Peter to enter the pin to provide public comment, looks like we have another speaker, Jason Dominguez. Jason, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I think I like this project from the higher general abstract nature of the project in the sense of bringing a high quality, small impact project to this area. What I'd love to see here is when you have this area fully developed with some great other more mature businesses, whether it's Love Warren, the Art Gallery, Wally's Art Gallery, some great restaurants, that allows smaller, more niche businesses like bookstores to develop here. I can't wait to see if the museum is able to open up there. But I think really having a strong, well-established block here makes a lot of sense. And to take advantage of those views makes sense. This is a structure that's already established. We're not building something to have a rooftop view. We're taking advantage of a rooftop view that's already present. And parking in this area, Rob did a great job working with all the stakeholders for the last few years to work on parking issues. I've never had a problem parking. I'm also generally one of the alternative users because I generally walk, jog, or push my baby in her stroller along the streets around here. And I think having a parking problem, if it eventually happens, is a good thing because it means lots of locals and visitors are using this area. And I think that's what we want is for good visitors to come here. I'm not too worried about having too many visitors because 80% of the time it's occupied and used by locals. When it's not summer weekends, which I think is when we have peak visitors, the rest of the year, it's a great place for locals to go and enjoy each other and enjoy our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dominguez.
And it looks like we are still having issues getting audio for Peter Strauss. I no longer see an audio option. While we're waiting to see if, oh wait, let's try this again. Peter Strauss, if you unmute yourself, you have 2 minutes. Peter Strauss, it looks like you are unmuted. However, we cannot hear you.
Mr. Busk, for anyone else who's maybe trying to get in, or for Mr. Strauss, let me also give that tech support phone number again for the technology vendor. It's 877-582-7011.
Thank you. And I've just sent another audio pin to Peter, so hopefully we're able to get that comment. In the meantime, I will ask if Ms. Fennessy has received any written correspondence on this item.
We did not receive any written correspondence for this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, are you able to enter that audio pin? Feel free to send me a question through the platform or to use that contact number to get help from LogMeIn. Hopefully we can resolve this and perhaps go back to you for a public comment after questions if you're still online.
Thank you, Mr. Busk. We'll see if we need to reopen public comment for Mr. Strauss or anyone else who's had technical difficulties. So with that, I'm going to bring it back to the commission for anybody who would like to start the question process. For those who aren't ready, you can go ahead and turn your webcams off and relax a bit. And so whoever would like to go first. Questions of staff and or the applicant. Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple quick ones. For Mr. Baumann, I just, the second story demolition, which is in our conditions of approval for this project that was supposed to be done on the prior project. If you could just please go over that. I don't think you went over that in your presentation, and perhaps give us an explanation of why that wasn't done, or if you have one or know one, and also the assurances that it is part of. It's on page 4 of 10 in our conditions of approval, and it's number 2B.
Right, Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Wiscombe, as we described, that demolition didn't occur. The building permit for the 2019 project, called it out, and the statistics. It was fairly explicit. It could have been more explicit in the plan set. I don't really have an answer for you. It got signed off in the field. It got final, building permit sign off. And I could see where the plans could have maybe had a separate floor plan explicitly showing the demolition. It was just described in the project data and indicated on one of the plans, but we could definitely have done a better job about calling that out, that was part of the project description. But as far as I know, from what I know, it got overlooked when the permit was signed off.
Okay,
Mr.
I
Baumann?
appreciate that answer. Thank you. Perhaps we could just go to the conditions of approval.
Okay.
On page 4 of 10 under 2B, just to show the public exactly what this condition is. This is the staff report. We need the conditions of approval. The
Yeah,
draft.
let's hold up until staff gets there for us.
Mr.
Baumann,
Russell, page 14 of 86.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I'm used to doing that, but then, yeah. And it's number 2B.
Right. So, we're all concerned that this didn't happen as it was permitted. So this is our attempt to make sure we don't make the same mistake again. So there's this condition. We think a separate standalone building permit will make it pretty plain. A permit that in the project description consists just of this demolition. So the plans will be all about the demolition. And there's another condition in here that addresses the same issue. I'm trying to remember which condition number that is. I'm looking for it here on my copy of it.
Is it possible, I don't know the project sequencing here, but is it possible to make, if this is a separate building permit, is it possible to get this done before work proceeds on the other aspects of the project?
Mr. Russell, on page 16 of 86 is the other condition that relates to this tenant space, condition F1.
Thank you, Mr. Busk.
Commissioner Wiscombe, to my colleagues, if you're not online to ask a question next, just to accommodate both Mr. Baumann and the applicant team, could you close your webcams? Because I think Mr. Gorin would like to make himself available for questions, either in tandem with Mr. Baumann or as commissioners ask him. So thank you. And Mr. Gorin, go ahead. To Commissioner Wiscombe.
Mr. Gorin,
you're muted.
Yeah.
How about now? Great.
Good.
I asked the property owner about this, and the issue with this is that, as you know, there were eviction moratoriums due to COVID that protected commercial tenants from being evicted, and you have to evict someone before you can demolish their space. So that's what caused this to happen. It's not because the city missed it or because we were nefariously trying to retain this tenant. It's just a simple matter of an unusual situation and an unusual law that kept us from being able to do it. So there's no reason to believe that this condition as written would result in the end condition of the space being demolished.
Okay, and is it possible that this condition be met before the other work begins? Is that, I don't know the sequencing of the work.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, it could. That demolition, it's part of a previous approved building permit. Okay, that permit was final. The permit was signed off already, so that permit's final, but this was already part of a building permit. And I think that the way that it could be handled is simply a revision to that permit filed after the permit, which would trigger another inspection.
Okay, or the work, or concurrent with the work on the project. In other words, it's one of the first items that happens in order to proceed with the project.
I'll defer to Tony. I mean, the timing doesn't seem like it would be critical to us if that's what makes the commission comfortable. I think the way I remember reading about this is it was a precondition of our building permit, or I'm not sure. I'm going to defer to Tony on that.
Madam Chair. Commissioner Lodge, please hold on a few minutes. Commissioner Wiscombe is up right
That's
now.
all right. I think Commissioner Lodge has something to add to this, so.
Okay, I just don't want too much kind of interactive question round robin, so we just have to be mindful of that. Go ahead, Commissioner Lodge. Did you have a question specific on this topic?
I had some discussion with Mr. Baumann about this a couple of days ago, and this is what, what he said before is what I heard. He referred to condition F1, which we just see on the screen, and because he didn't know if the project could go for the winery, the two-story winery facility could go ahead with, and if there'd be a problem doing this ahead of time. If it can be done ahead of time, that would be preferable. If not, condition F1 needs to be tightened up. It says field inspection, a field inspection by planning division staff of all tenant spaces on site is required prior to certificate of occupancy for the project building permits. It needs to say a field inspection showing that all required work has been completed needs to be in there, and then that would take care of the issue before they get their certificate of occupancy.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest if you could make a note of any changes, including this, that you would like to recommend to the conditions of approval when we get to our deliberations, we can certainly take that up. I want to make sure we continue on with questions at this time. But so if the two of you, it sounds like both Commissioners Wiscombe and Lodge, if you would just note that for yourselves, we can come back to this section of the conditions of approval for any edits, any recommended edits.
That's fine, Madam Chair. I didn't want to dwell on this too long, but I just think that we do need to tighten this up, and however we do that is we can look at that. I wanted to go back, just a couple other questions. Valet operations. I remember in 2019 permit that they were free. Is that correct, Mr. Gorin? Was that in the conditions of approval?
It is.
Commissioner Wiscombe, that was in the previous ones, and that's also in these ones.
Okay, I didn't see it in here. So I saw the valet operations, but I did not see a condition that showed them being free. Maybe Mr. Bus can point me to that.
If we go to page 8 of 10 in the conditions of approval, this is G6C, valet charge. I think this is what you're asking about, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Oh, there it is. Okay, I see it now. Yeah.
We'll just scroll down. Let staff scroll down so everybody's following.
Yeah, valet parking should be offered free of charge at all times. Great. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was there. I'm sorry I overlooked that. I read the A and B, but never saw C. So, okay, great. And then just one last question. I want to go back to the findings, Mr. Baumann. And I don't know if it's slide 16 or if it's the slide before. It's the slide before slide 17, but so it might be 16, but it's the one before 17. If you could put that up on the screen. Just want to make sure I understand this. Okay. I just wanted to look at policy 3.1-29. I don't want to look at the policy. I saw the term substantial redevelopment there, and I know, Mr. Bauman, we talked about that on site, and this is not considered a substantial redevelopment. So I just wanted to see what that policy actually said there. So, okay, I'm fine with that, and that's the end of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Of course, we can always come back if there are follow-on questions.
Excuse me, Chair Schwartz. I wonder if I could follow up on the question about the demolition of the Skyana wine tenant space.
Sure, please, Mr. Bauman.
Because I heard what Mr. Gorin said about it wasn't done because a moratorium on evicting commercial tenants, but that's really puzzling to me because I'm pretty confident our building inspectors would have communicated that with the planning division to say, hey, look, we know this permit needs to demolish the second floor inside the building, but they can't do that. Can they get a revision to the permit? But I didn't hear any communication at all on the issue. And maybe it was an assumption on my part, but I just assumed that it got overlooked by the field inspector. So I just wanted to, I'm not too clear on what was happening with that. Like I said, I'm confident the field inspector would have called out such a big issue like that or brought it to our attention in the planning division for that.
Mr. Gorin, did you have any supplemental
Sure, Swartz.
information?
All I can say is this wouldn't be the first time or even the only time I've heard about, building inspectors not carrying through on something. And I think that it's happened on a couple of different projects. We had a whole appeal over a glass railing on the Riviera where this exact same thing happened. I think that your specific condition here with the language tightening that Commissioner Lodge is recommending guarantees that this will get taken care of because it's essentially creating a building inspection by planning staff. So we don't have to worry about, miscommunication or lack of communication. It will ensure that this gets done when it's supposed to.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Bauman, before we go to Commissioner Reed?
Yes, just quickly on that issue of a moratorium on eviction. I don't know if that's in place or not. I don't know anything about that. And I don't know if that would impede the same thing from happening under this permit now, like Mr. Jordan described for the previous permit, if that's what happened. Just don't know the answer to that.
Do we need Ms. Ostranger to join us for clarification or not regarding the status of the law?
I can speak to that. I mean, what that would do if that happened, I mean, again, eviction moratoriums didn't come into place because somebody just thought they'd be a neat idea. They came into place because of COVID-19 and protecting tenants because of their business being down. And a lot of those protections have expired. The COVID-19, we're opening up the economy. I would expect that any other eviction protections are also going to expire. But, if in theory they didn't, the impact it would have would be that we would simply be delayed to the point that we'd be able to start our construction. There's no reason why this would prevent us from being able to pull a permit for this. We'd have our permit and we might be delayed a little bit while we had to wait to move somebody. I'm not sure that this affects anybody in this building with the exception of that one tenant. So I think we're making a much bigger issue out of this than we need to be.
Commissioner Wiscombe, you're back with us on this topic.
Yes, I really don't want to belabor this, but I think that we could certainly add that there's an agreement between the tenant and the building owner that the space is demolished. you know, if it really got to that point, if there's still an eviction order in place. So, I mean, there's other ways to handle it. So I think,
Okay,
you know,
and
we have a number of suggestions.
And I'm just going to say that if this is a legal matter, I would like Ms. Ostringer to advise us on whether or not we as Planning Commission should even be pursuing it, but I'm gonna ask her to please give us legal advice if that's appropriate. I'll wait to see it. There you are. Thank you, Ms. Ostringer.
Hi, Chair Schwartz. I don't know that it necessarily be appropriate to put in the conditions of approval an agreement between the property owner and the tenant, because that really is hearsay. We don't know what the agreement is. I think the way that staff has drafted the conditions and as maybe tightening up that F1 as was suggested should clear up the problem. If the tenant's still in there, it just means that the demolition can't be done, and it's in the tenant and the property owner's best interest to move it forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Ostringer. And if I could ask you to stand by when we ultimately get to deliberations and conditions of approval, perhaps you could assist us with what appropriate, quote, tightening up might look like that keeps us within the legal boundaries. So thank you very much. Okay. Back to, I think we're now to Commissioner Reed for questions.
Right. Let's see. Mr. Bauman, I wanted to get some clarification on some of the breakdowns of the space, specifically the storage areas. So, the wine storage area shown on the site plan is a separate space. That it's my understanding that's a non-conforming use, correct? That will be kept non-conforming and allowed to operate with a 1 per 500 requirement.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Reed, that's correct, although it's already a storage use, so it wouldn't really be a change of use. It would be a new tenant, but not necessarily a change of use of that portion of their area that they're leasing.
Okay, and that is on the interior of the building. That's the 1,026 square feet.
Right.
Okay. And then there's this 258 square feet of bar storage on the rooftop, correct?
Right.
And is that parked at 1 per 500?
I think so. I don't remember. It's either 1 for 500 or 1 for 250. It's in the parking data, but we did account for parking that enclosed storage area.
I was just curious because I thought so. I'm just curious if it is parked 1 per 500, how it gets parked 1 per 500 if it's a new space and it's not allowed under the OC zone.
It would depend on its use. It would have a new parking requirement for the new floor area depending on the use category of the storage room. I just don't remember off the top of my head what rate we used. We added the per seat for the green area inside the building, the wine tasting. That was we calculated the parking requirement based on seats in that area, and then the blue area for the wine storage, we calculated that out at 1 for 500, and the roof deck area was per number of seats, and we accounted for that little storage room too.
Okay. Mr. Gorin, did you have clarification on that?
Yeah, Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, that storage area is ancillary to the winery. It's part of the winery space, and the parking trigger on the winery space is seat count. It isn't by square footage. So it's absorbed in the seat count for the winery, and it is new space. It's not being treated as it's a conforming use.
Gotcha. Great. And Mr. Gordon, while you're here, I just had a question as I was reading through this, if a modification would be needed if the rooftop wasn't included. I think just looking at it quickly, if you remove the rooftop, this is just a hypothetical, there'd be 43 required spaces. And with the lift and valet, there's 45 spaces provided. Is this correct?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, if that's the math, then yeah, it's correct. We're counting all of that area in seats and providing the parking for it. So yeah, based on I think we would still need a modification because the ordinance requirement would still be higher than the 45 spaces that we have here. The ordinance requirement with that 1,300 square foot deck is, I think it's 68 spaces. So if we were to take those 40 seats out of there, that's 1 per 3 seats. That's about, what is that? I'm terrible at math. It's like 12 spaces or something, 13 spaces. So I believe we'd still need a modification.
Commissioner Reed,
It just
that is
wouldn't be as big.
correct. Removing the roof deck means they'd still need about 55 spaces, so it would still be a parking modification.
Great. And then wanted to talk through the shared parking demand study a bit, how it's inserted into the staff report and the conditions of approval. So I don't think it was made clear in the staff report, but Mr. Gordon, I think you spoke to that there was a parking demand study for the first modification, correct? I didn't review that project, so is that right?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, yeah, that's correct. It was the same. We did the exact same parking demand analysis for that one in support of that modification, and all the methodologies and everything are preserved in this one, but we adjusted the inputs basically.
Okay, so in the staff report, I think this is page 7, it says a condition of approval has been proposed to ensure future uses remain consistent with the shared parking demand study. And I'm assuming that's referencing item 5 on page 18 of the COA under use limitations. Is that right?
Let's give staff an opportunity to have this on screen. Thank you.
Commissioner Reed, yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. You don't need to jump back to this. You can keep it here. But in the staff report, I think it's page 6, it says future changes of use proposed within these portions of the building would be limited to uses for which the parking requirement of 1 space per 500 square feet can be met. So I'm just a little confused whether this is, are we being consistent with the parking ordinance requirements or the parking demand study for future uses?
Chair Schwartz, I'll let Tony in on it.
Yes, that would be consistency with the parking requirement in the ordinance.
But then but it did say that future uses would be consistent not with the ordinance necessarily, but with the shared parking demand study. I'm just confused on this.
Chair Schwartz, I mean, I could maybe clear it up. Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, we had the same condition previously. And so this condition is why we're here today. Basically, what it
Yeah.
says is if you go change in uses in this building, you've got to look at parking again. And if you're changing a use that's the same as the use that's there, that's okay. If you're changing a use to something different than what's there, you need to do this whole thing again and make sure it matches. So the wine storage area, for example, that is currently a non-conforming use, will remain a non-conforming use. It's a 1 per 500 use. If we were to change that to some other non-conforming use that was still 1 per 500, that's okay. But if we were to say expand the seating area, the winery into there, that generates coming back here and doing this all again.
Okay, so to that point, Mr. Gorin, it seemed like some of the language in here, at least in the staff report, well, even the COA, like on page 11 of the COA, under approved development, it says a maximum of 155 seats for all uses with a per seat parking requirement. It just sounds like you would have an opportunity if you wanted to convert a 1 per 500 use into a higher use, an intensification of the use, to come back a third time. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And that would effectively be the same process. You would just update your shared parking demand study to show that that's appropriate.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, that's right. Basically, we would have to do what we're doing here, which is either prove that we meet it with the parking we have, and if we don't meet it, figure out some way to provide more parking for it.
Okay. Last question on the puzzle stack or puzzle lift, whatever the technical term is. Let's just a hypothetical. Let's say that there's a new parking standard in the funk zone, the OC zone. Let's say that suddenly there's a parking zone of benefit, or there's an expansion of the central business district, whatever. Could that puzzle lift be removed, be repurposed into tenant space?
Sure, Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, if there are some new parking regulations or benefits or ways to meet demand in the future, then yes, it could be if somebody wanted to come in and try to change things. And I'm basically any project down in the coastal zone's got to show that it's meeting its demand. So any way available to do that might exist at that future time does that.
Gotcha. Let me just look through my notes here and see if I have anything else. I don't think so. I think that's it for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Higgins, please. Questions for staff or the applicant?
Yeah, to staff, to Tony or Allison, does the park we're just talking about alternate realities, I guess. So let me go to the reality where we have the NZO in the coastal zone at some point in the future, where we have the relaxed standards for restaurant parking at 1 for 250. Did anybody count the project demand under the NZO? Title 30, just for
Commissioner Higgins, we did not.
Does maybe the applicant, do you know, Mr. Gorin, if we were in a world where the Coastal Commission had approved our NZO, would the project?
Commissioner Higgins, I did just take a hypothetical look at that, not as part of this project review per se, just for staff enlightenment, because that's where you compare what the Title 30 allows for parking, being like for a restaurant, it's 1 space per 250 square feet. And that kind of gets to our work that Allison and I did looking at the seating plans of several restaurants and see how many square feet there are per seat. And just, this is all real rough calculations because these seating plans are quite variable. But on the sample that we looked at, it looked like, let's say roughly the Title 30 parking requirement would be about a third of what it is now under Title 28 on a per seat basis.
So, Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Higgins, I just did the math. The building's 9,964 square feet. The roof deck is 1,300 square feet. So if you add all those together, it's 11,264 square feet. And if you parked 100% of the building at 1 per 250, it actually generates exactly 45 spaces. Not 100% of the building is 1 per 250 uses, but if it were, yes, these 45 spaces in this alternate reality, the Title 30 zoning standard, yeah, it would meet it.
So to staff, when does the Coastal Commission look at just a refresher on that? For me, it seems like every time I ask, it gets pushed back, but is the Coastal Commission going to entertain Title 30 at some point?
Commissioner Higgins, yes, at some point. However, it's quite a ways down the road. We need to do our ENZO or our Title 30 cleanups first, and then we will be submitting to coastal staff. So it won't be in the near future.
2 to 4 years range?
I think that's a fair estimate.
Okay. And then to the applicant, if no parking were required of you, would you still provide parking?
If no parking would, Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Higgins, if no parking was required, would we still provide parking?
Let me back up. In the olden days, people provided parking because store owners knew their customers wanted parking and would drive. That was really the sole way of getting around town to go visit, retail or commercial outlets was a vehicle in the 40s and 50s when, most of our commercial buildings were constructed. So we have a very robust transit system today by comparison, and a higher mix of uses. It doesn't necessarily require people drive everywhere. So just on a sheer market demand or customer demand standpoint, what do you think?
What I think, and this is just, my business understanding of things and what I understand about how customers come to this site and the existing businesses is that if we didn't have to meet parking demand because of the Coastal Act or the ordinance, that we might not provide the additional spaces because people aren't really depending on those spaces so much from everything we've heard and from what we all have experienced personally down there. But, we've got the policies that we have today and we've got the zoning ordinance requirement. And so we have to meet that. And that's a parking lift it's not a cheap thing. It's not an impulse purchase. It's really expensive and especially when you're trying to carry it out right aesthetically like this one. So, if we didn't feel that the customers really depended on it, then, maybe we wouldn't be doing the additional parking. But what you're saying, I think, is that basically we have to do it. We've got to comply with the regulations we have in front of us right now. So this is how we are going to comply with those.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions. I'm ready to provide comments or move on whenever you are.
Okay.
We'll
We'll see you in a bit, Commissioner Higgins. And as a follow-on to what Mr. Gorin just said, I just want to ground us and bring us to the findings that we ultimately would need to make today. They're on page 10 of the staff report. So this is our reality today. We're going to traffic in reality and not in hypotheticals ultimately during our deliberations. So parking modification, that's one. We're also going to be looking at findings in support of a coastal development permit. There are 2 sub-items. This is on page 10 of the staff report, which is 10 of 86 in our package for staff. There we go. So as we continue on with questions and ultimately deliberations, I just want to put this in front of my colleagues, since this is where this is where our road will ultimately lead us today in terms of findings. Additional questions from my colleagues? Commissioner Bonderson, we'll go to Vice Chair Escobedo. Commissioner Bonderson, questions of staff or Mr. Gorin?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Chair Schwartz, I just want to make sure I'm not cutting off Vice Chair Escobedo. I know you've been on, but did you want to go next? No, okay, thank you. So I actually was curious about 2 things. Everything else that was of interest to me has already been discussed to a good extent. So this makes it quick. My first question was more of a curiosity, but I was interested in knowing a little bit more about the there's a phrase in the staff report talking about 22 of the spaces are encumbered by the restaurant use in the adjacent building at 29 East Cabrillo Boulevard through an off-site parking agreement. And I was just curious to know a little bit more about that, simply because I'm assuming that this agreement has an expiration, and if there's any intention or thought to continuing that relationship in the future, if everyone's in agreement, or if those parking spots come back to usage for the current usage that you're proposing here today.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bonderson, that off-site parking agreement, that's where I had the slide earlier where it doesn't really appear to be off-site, but it technically is because of the property line next to the building. But that agreement has to remain in place to support the uses in that building, so they can't get rid of that agreement. I mean, they could make a substitute agreement, for another nearby piece of property, but as long as those uses are in place in the 29 East Cabrillo building, they have to have the parking provided for it. So they have to keep that agreement in place.
And from my knowledge, that's a different owner, that's a different property, am I correct?
I don't know who owns it, but it's a different property. The land that the 29 East Cabrillo Boulevard building is on is a different piece of land.
Just to be really clear, the reason I was curious was because if the return of those 22 spaces is in any way beneficial or needed for the current property and the proposal that's in place here, whether or not that there was any thought or talk about getting those back in the near or far future. Has there been any discussion of that, or is that just not on the table today?
I think they're just not available because they're accounted for.
Thank you. And my other question was with regard to noise. In the findings, we often talk about noise. And I was curious to know, I did my own walkthrough, and I know that there are a few residential units more or less about a block away, just beyond the fish house. And other than that, I couldn't identify anything on my own. Is there any concern throughout construction and future use for any noise issues or concerns for the residential units?
Commissioner Bonderson, are you talking about the use of the roof deck following completion or just during construction?
I'm curious about both. Thank you.
Well, the construction can occur just within the regular hours allowed in the city for construction. And I haven't looked at the issue of the noise from the roof deck, or even if there is noise from a roof deck above, or what that decibel level would be. I don't know if Ms. DeBusk has any more insight. I don't know any answer to that question, really.
Commissioner Bonderson, through Chair Schwartz, the zoning in this area is HRC2 and OC. which basically do not allow residential uses. So that's the reason why we didn't consider that to be a big concern.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Busk. Those conclude my questions. And if there is any concern about noise during construction, we can speak about that when we deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Vice Chair Escobedo, questions?
Yeah, just a couple. Thank you, Madam Chair. And they're for Mr. Gorin, and mostly out of curiosity, I suppose. But for the parking stacker, if there are maintenance issues, is the company that services that parking stacker, where are they located?
Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, I don't know. That's a good question. I could find out maybe if I can text my client here while we're talking about other questions.
Yeah, and I'm just curious about in terms of being able to get the maintenance work done, and if for some of these products, I mean, it could be out of state, but maybe they contract in California, or maybe they're based in California. So that was one thought that I had. And then another thought, and again, it's out of curiosity, so if you don't have the answer, I'm not going to hold it against you, but electric vehicles are heavier because of the batteries. And so I'm wondering if, I'm guessing that these parking stackers take that into consideration in terms of the load that they're able to take. And so as we see more electric vehicles, you're going to see heavier vehicles, and was hoping that you could speak to that a little bit.
Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, they do take that into account. They have designed vehicles they use, and if it's like any other engineered product, they've designed it to 1.5 or 2 times what they expect the actual loads to be going in this thing.
Okay, that sounds good. Those were the only questions I had. The other commissioners addressed all my other concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other follow-on questions from my colleagues before I go to my questions? I'll just wait a minute to see if anybody comes online. Okay. I wanted to ask you, I think primarily Mr. Gorin, I'm looking at the relationship between the parking stacker and valet. First, let me ask staff to go to page 12 of 86 in our packet. And this sentence is addressed as areas available for parking. There we go. All parking areas and access thereto shall be kept open and available in the manner in which it was designed and permitted. So valet is there to assist during the business hours. The parking stacker will be available during the business hours only. What is the relationship, or maybe you could clarify this for me, between the role of the valet and getting the cars in and out of the parking stacker?
Chair Schwartz, it is solely the role of the valet to get cars in and out of the parking stacker.
Okay. I don't know if we need to specify that. I'm going to ask my colleagues to think about if that has to be clarified in the conditions of approval. Just thinking out loud right now. Follow on to Vice Chair Escobedo's questions. For any troubleshooting during these hours that this parking stacker is in use, any technical difficulty, will that be handled by the trained valet? Are they going to know how to remedy that in order to get the customers' cars or vehicles out of there?
Chair Schwartz, I think it's going to depend on the nature of the problem. I would think that a lot of minor problems that come up in the regular operation of something like this, that the valets are going to be completely comfortable handling them because they do it all the time. And if there's some massive technological meltdown, then we're going to temporarily have an issue with that. I did get some information back to Vice Chair Escobedo's question. That the company is called City Lift. It's the same lifts that the city has approved that are over in the other project you were talking about earlier. And they've got technicians that are nearby. They have lifts all over the place in Southern California. So I think a good comparison would be something like the elevators in the building I work in, right? So we depend on those. They're mechanical. They usually go up and down just fine, but sometimes they break. And so the guy comes down from Santa Maria and fixes them. But temporarily, you know, we don't have that elevator in use. So I just think that's just something you have when you've got these types of technologies being used.
I noticed in the site visit that Commissioner Wiscombe and I had this morning over at 226 East De La Guerra, you were just referencing that. There's a sign in front of the parking stacker that refers any difficulties, technical difficulties, to an on-site attendant. And the Radius General Manager explained to us that that's an round-the-clock on-site manager at that property. So there's somebody there 24/7 to deal with difficulties with the parking stacker and getting cars in and out. That's why I was asking you about the training of the valet, the role of the valet. We can't foresee all technical difficulties, but we certainly don't want to have a backup of customers who can't get their cars out because of some routine, I'll call it more routine technical difficulties, as opposed to, you called it a meltdown, you know, some major large structural issue.
Yeah, Chair Schwartz, I think that it's basically analogous to what we would have here. So we're talking about things that can be resolved by their on-site manager. They don't have a technician from the company over there. It's the person on site who knows how to fix these things. And we also would have a person on site that knows how to fix these things, you know, during the course of operations.
And that person would be with the valet company you're confirming? Is that what you're saying?
That's what would make the most sense.
Okay.
They're the ones who operate it. So
yes, City Lift, and we saw the City Lift branding there this morning at 226 East De La Guerra. My only other question pertaining to the answers that you've given, and maybe I'm overlooking something, Mr. Baumann, in the conditions of approval is a description of the new parking stacker as part of the use fulfillment and mitigation. Can you help direct me to some language that I may be overlooking? I looked at all the sections where I thought we have parking described, but I don't see that. And I did not go back to any other projects where we've detailed out the parking stacker requirement and operational assumptions or compliance requirements.
Chair Schwartz, we didn't provide any conditions related to the parking stacker per se, just the one that we saw on the screen, all areas available for parking, which basically means you can't change the parking from the way it was approved.
Well, but we are changing the parking the way it was previously approved. We're going vertical.
Oh, what I meant was once if the CDP is approved, this is a condition to the owner that he can't change the parking from the way the Planning Commission would approve it today.
So then are we looking for a nexus, some type of approval nexus between the architectural plans and the conditions of approval that link our findings and approval to what's not in the conditions of approval, but what we see on an architectural plan, which includes the new standalone parking stacker? Can somebody help me with, you see where I'm going with my question?
That would be the plan set that we provided to you in your packet today. That would be the plan set you're approving. And then it would carry.
Chair Schwartz, one of the first conditions that we have talks about the approved development, and it refers to the plans that the Planning Commission reviews today. If they approve them, those become the approved set that helps define the project description.
Okay, let me just go to that. Can we just go to that, Mr. Busk?
Let me find that page number.
Okay.
Page 11 of the PDF.
You mean it's on the first page of conditions of approval? Is that what you
Condition,
mean? Page
condition Roman numeral 1B,
Yeah.
number 1.
1B, B as in boy. Okay.
Right,
So let's look at, you mean approved development?
right.
Okay, let's look at that language. It's on the screen here. I don't need to look down. And the improvements shown on the plans. Okay. So we need to ensure, colleagues, I'll just say this so we all are looking at this. We need to ensure that we're very clear about the plans vis-a-vis the new parking, the supplemental innovative parking structure that we're talking about. Okay, because otherwise it's not mentioned anywhere in the conditions of approval. And I'm not pushing that it needs to be. I would really look to staff and your extensive experience as to whether or not there needs to be even minimal reference in the text here, as opposed to just on the plans. But I'll defer to staff, Mr. Busk and you, Mr. Bauman, and even Ms. Ostringer, if that's important to have anywhere else. Mr. Busk?
Chair Schwartz, this is typically how we do it. However, we could include an additional reference to the number of parking spaces on site, just as additional reinforcement and a quicker reference to what's required. The cover sheet of the plans has a very detailed breakdown of required parking. And then, as we said, those plans become incorporated into the project description.
Okay, well, I'll just put on the radar for my colleagues to consider. I think it was slide 7 of the presentation showed, maybe, I can't remember, Mr. Gorin, if this was your presentation or Mr. Bauman's, that
Vice Chair Escobedo, it appears that Commissioner Schwartz may be having some technical difficulties. I did want to point out one additional thing is that if the Planning Commission were to approve this project, we generate a resolution for the project. And the first part of the resolution includes a more detailed project description, the one that was on the agenda. And just looking at that agenda description, it does note that there's a 22 space mechanical parking lift. So that would be incorporated into the resolution itself.
Okay, perfect. So we wouldn't have to add it to the conditions of approval.
You would not need to, but you could if you wanted to.
Okay. Since Chair Schwartz was in the middle of her questions and she was the last one, I think it would be appropriate if we took a, let's say, 7-minute break, and so come back at 4:20. So we'll take a brief recess, allow Chair Schwartz to get back on. We are now in recess.
Consider whether or not you think it's important to have some sort of reference in the conditions of approval on a parking stacker. And I think my last comment, maybe before
Madam Chair, if I could interject, I think it would be helpful to have Ms. DeBus come back on, because she did address one of your concerns about adding the specific number of parking spaces to the conditions of approval.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Mr. Busk, let's,
Yes.
Then this will wrap up my question. Mhm.
Sure, I was just explaining to the commission that when we develop a resolution of approval for the project, it includes a more detailed project description at the very beginning of the resolution. And the project description that we would use is the same one that we used on the agenda, which does note that the project includes a 22 space parking lift, and it identifies the total number of parking spaces on site.
Okay. Mr. Gordon, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you want to say anything further before because otherwise that concludes my questions. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just leave that for my colleagues to consider. Okay, so let's do this. Additional question, Commissioner Reed?
Nope, I'm just ready to kick off the comments.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Bonderson, I saw your hand up, but no, okay. I'm just looking down the line. Since Commissioner Higgins has a hard stop at 5, why don't you, if you're ready, Commissioner Higgins, go first with deliberations. And before you begin, could we please ask staff to put back up the findings that we need to make? There we go. Very good. Okay, over to you, Commissioner Higgins. Let's look at the findings on the screen and then go ahead and please share your comments with us.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I can approve the project. It's a reluctant approval, not because of anything the applicant has proposed, but because it's the construct of our code that requires that we continue to take up real estate to provide more automobile day spas, whatever you want to call these car hotels. I mean, there's a sea of parking that goes unused in the evenings when this peak demand is going to be higher across the street and within a pedestrian, new pedestrian alley, 2 or 3 or 400 feet away. So, but that being said, we don't live in that reality. We live in the reality that there's parking required, and we have to accommodate that. So I can make the findings. I think I'll offer just a quick amendment to the conditions of approval on F1, see if that gets any traction. It's an inspection by planning staff to all tenant spaces on site is required prior to CO for the building permits and shall include verification.
Hold on, Commissioner Higgins, we have staff not tracking with where you're going. Staff, could you please bring us to page 16 of 86 in our package so that we can follow along with Commissioner Higgins? And F1, we talked about this earlier, prior to occupancy field inspection. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, I think that's the
okay.
right place to do this, but.
Okay, now we have that in front of us. Thank you. Let's go slowly so staff can track with what we need to look on the screen so we can zero in on requested considered changes. Thank you.
End of the sentence at F1 to verify demolition of the tenant space, and then give it a reference, whatever it is. Does that satisfy Commissioner Wiscombe? I think that's what the issue is, that we verify demolition prior to CO of this project.
Yes, that worked, and we can just reference the prior 2019 conditions of approval for that demolition, I think, and the prior CDP.
Yeah, so that I think that's the only thing I heard from anybody else with respect to modifying the conditions of approval. So I'll make a motion to approve the project with that amendment and make the findings, and we'll look forward to hearing other people's comments.
I'll second that.
And that's great. I have just one to Commissioner Higgins' motion, just one. I believe Chair Schwartz brought this up, specify the role of valet for parking stacker, so that it's the exclusive role or responsibility of the of the valet to operate the parking stacker. I think, Chair Schwartz, you thought that should be in there, and that would be fine with me. Just
Okay,
to make
I
sure
think,
that the role of the valet becomes clearer.
okay, let's look at where that might be. We're having a little bit of a round robin here, and if staff is okay, if Ms. Ostranger's okay with that, I'm okay with that. So that would be, let's look at where that might go in the conditions. Probably, I'm thinking if we go to page 18 of 86 in the package, this is under valet operation. We have 3 subsections here, A, B, and C. Did you have any thoughts, Commissioner Wiscombe? Because you were listening to my comments, my question.
Oh, sorry, my landline's ringing.
It's okay, we
No,
can hear you.
The only, I think you should take the lead on this, Chair Schwartz, because you brought it up. I think it's just, it just makes it clearer that the valet is responsible for the parking structure. And I think any sort of sentence that staff could help us with to add to that, or Ms. Ostranger would just clarify that and make sure that, you know, there's no, oh, well, my buddy's going to take over while I take a 10-minute break type thing, you know, that.
Madam Chair, what are you trying to prevent from happening?
I wouldn't call it prevention. I'm looking for a documented nexus between the new, I'll call it supplemental parking arrangement, which is this vertical standalone parking stacker, and the rationale for that, and then to Commissioner Wiscombe's comment just now, the operational responsibility for that. And we heard from Mr. Gorin that would be the valet. I think he confirmed that would very logically be, and I think we need to confirm and ask for some commitment that be the part of the responsibility of the valet.
Okay, Madam
Yes.
Chair, the Blue Star Valet Operations Plan is already an exhibit to our documents, and it's to also be further amended, I believe, or approved by the Public Works Department, and that's the document where it looks like it identifies the Blue Star as the operator of the stacker.
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Wiscombe.
Madam Chair, we could just solve it. This isn't a big issue, but Chair Schwartz did bring it up. We could just add a sentence that says the parking attendant shall have full responsibility for the operation of the parking lift.
And maybe to Commissioner Higgins'
Full and
point.
exclusive, excuse me, full and exclusive.
Full and exclusive.
Responsibility for operation of the parking lift, if that's okay with Ms. Ostranger. And then that just solves, it makes it very clear in the conditions of approval.
I'm looking, Commissioner Higgins, I'm looking at Exhibit E, which starts on page 67 of 86 in our package. This is the Blue Star Valet Operations Plan that you just referenced. And I just want to take a moment to glance down on this to see where there might be a sentence, a very simple sentence that we could pull from this and drop into the conditions of approval that would give me that comfort level I'm talking about in terms of a direct nexus. Let me just see here. I don't know if anybody would like to jump in and assist me, or staff, or let's see, where would that be, Commissioner Higgins? Where's the reference to the parking stacker? Since you referenced this, can you pinpoint that for me, Commissioner Higgins?
Yeah, I'm looking for it again here.
Okay. And I'm looking as well.
Madam Chair, it may be on page 69 of 86 under C.
Okay, let's look there.
Yeah, there's
Sites
a,
requiring valet parking services must ensure a parking attendant will be on duty at all times the facility is in use and provide sufficient staff and facilities to ensure that automobiles are moved for parking promptly. It doesn't quite address what you had talked about,
it
but
talks about the use of the stacker though in section B.
Oh, let's go back to B. So that's on the prior page.
But I still am not, I'm not really understanding what you're trying to do or make a connection for or prevent.
Oh, okay. It's not preventive. It's not prophylactic. It's to ensure that in the conditions of approval that we will be approving today, that there's a direct nexus in the language between the new supplemental standalone parking stacker and the operational requirements, including who, in this case, which entity is responsible for the operational maintenance. That's all I'm looking to accomplish. Not
Yeah, I
any
think
more
Ms.
complex than that.
Commissioner
One
Wiscombe's
sentence would
language says
suffice.
that. Your
So-
language, Commissioner Wiscombe, you get, that accomplishes that, right, that you added? That's that.
I think it does, Commissioner Higgins. And the other thing is, what if Blue Star parking attendants doesn't always in the future operate this valet facility? So this language then even becomes more important because we don't have, if Blue Star is replaced by someone else, we don't have that language in the conditions of approval. So I think that one sentence covers it. And
If
I
I
hope
could
you-
also hop on. Hi, my name is
Ms.
Caitlin Momolsky. I'm with Transportation Planning.
Thank you,
Chair
Ms.
Schwartz,
Momolsky.
and commissioners. There's a section in the city's access and parking design standards that says specifically for lifts that a valet may be required for parking lifts or parking machines serving non-residential uses in which the parking facility serves infrequent users or where the duration of visit is anticipated to be for a short period of time.
May. Did you say May?
That's
See, this is-
exactly what I'm saying, May. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe what we could do, let's move on. Oh, Miss Ostringer, you joined us. I don't want to overcomplicate this. If there is a single sentence
It's
that
too
will
late.
suffice, that is just fine with me. I think I've made my interest clear. Miss Ostringer, are you here to assist us? Hopefully.
Chair Schwartz and commissioners, I think the language that Commissioner Wiscombe originally offered would, if the commission so chooses to have such a condition, would satisfy Chair Schwartz, your concern just by saying that the valet attendant will have the sole and exclusive responsibility to operate the lift. I think just that single sentence would satisfy it. I
Okay,
do
so-
agree with Commissioner Wiscombe. It wouldn't be a good idea to identify a particular company because they might not be operating that in the future.
I agree.
I'll amend my motion to include condition 6. Well, looks like it's G6D.
B as in boy.
No, it's an added under valet operation on page 18 of 86.
Uh-huh. It's 6B as in boy. It's called valet parking. Wouldn't we just add a sentence?
Or a new dangling sentence that says,
Whatever staff would like us to consider is fine with me. Maybe, let's do this. Maybe they can work on it. How about this? Ms. DeBusk, would you please work on this with Ms. Ostringer while we continue on, because there are other commissioners who haven't had an opportunity yet to deliberate. So let's have them work on the language. Yes.
Madam Chair, I think we could just add the sentence to 6B, valet parking operation, and call it a day. I think
That's
as
what I'm
long as staff
suggesting.
agrees, yeah.
my
That's what I'm
motion is
suggesting.
amended. I'll amend my motion with that change.
And I second that.
Okay. Let's, again, as a courtesy to the other commissioners, I would like to see if you'd like to deliberate on the motion. Well, and you've now heard a friendly amendment to the original motion. Commissioner Bonderson or Commissioner whoever might like to comment further, please. Go ahead, Commissioner Wiscombe.
I really don't have anything to add. I think it's a fine project. I'm excited about it, and I can fully support it and approve the modification for parking and make the findings. And I do agree with Commissioner Higgins. I thought his analogy to Title 30 and how many spaces would be required was really quite interesting. So I think it's a great project, and I commend both staff and the applicant for making it a fine project. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Bonderson, did you have your hand up next, I think? Please go ahead with your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. I also want to put in my opinion about this project. I was very, very happy to see the staff report and the presentation. It was very thorough. It didn't leave any room for questions from me. I appreciate the comments of my fellow commissioners because they did cover the few things that were on my mind, and we've really, gone through a lot of them in detail today. So I'm happy to see that. As far as the project itself and the proposal brought forth by the winery and obviously the owners, I'm very excited to see a project like this. I'm happy to vote to approve a project like this, especially because of the area of town that we are seeing this kind of development and improvement in our community with the rooftop. I'm looking forward and certainly hope that more projects will come forward with public spaces like this that aren't specifically reserved for tourists, hotel users and such. So it benefits all of us in the community. So with that, I'll just say I agree with this project. I look forward to doing our vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge, you had your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I too can support this project. I just hope, since this will be number 11, according to the Urban Wine Trails website, number 11 in the funk zone, I just hope wine tasting doesn't go out of fashion. I do have a concern in some of the earlier conversation about what happens if there's a meltdown. Something that does happen is the power goes out. I've had conversation with transportation about possibly requiring a generator or as they're considering at 226 East De La Guerra, a battery backup. And I wonder if that might not be an appropriate condition to add. I'd be interested in transportation's or Mr. Bauman's comments on that.
Did you want to inquire about that now before we continue, either of staff or Mr. Gorin? Oh, here we are, Ms. Momolsky.
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Lodge. There have been other lift systems that it has been a standard on the equipment. So I might ask the applicant if he's familiar with if that's already something that's part of the machinery that's being proposed. I've seen other city lift projects where they do have backup generators. So we could try and get that information for you.
Did you want to ask that now, Commissioner Lodge, while we're still deliberation? Yes. Mr. Gorin, welcome back.
Mr. Gorin knows whether there is, I think he would have mentioned it in the earlier discussion, if they do provide such
Am I up? I can't see myself. So I don't know if the specified equipment we have here has that available. That the way we spec'd it out, it may be an available option for the equipment. The other thing that I'm understanding that they do from the valet guys that are texting me when you were talking about this is if there's a power outage, they can get a generator over really quickly and use that to get people's car out of the lifts. Also, if there's a power outage, the businesses don't have power either. So the demand sort of goes off with it. So I think the real critical thing is how do people get their cars out if there's no power? And the way that they do that is they can bring a generator over and power it up and get the cars out.
Okay. Yeah, well, when the power is out, there won't be new people coming, but the people that are there will want to leave. So they need to be able to get their cars out. Okay, well, I'll let it go at that then. Otherwise, I can support the project.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Let me just look down here. Commissioner Reed, you seconded the motion, but you didn't, I don't know that you made any comments. Would you like to comment now?
Sure. Yeah, I obviously support the project, having seconded it. I think a lot of people have said this is great for the funk zone. I agree, and I think it's great for the city as a whole. It's a clever project. A lot is going into a relatively small property, and I commend the property owner and his team for moving on this. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Vice Chair Escobedo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will be supporting the project. I think it's a great project, especially for the space. Just a few comments. I share Commissioner Higgins' point about parking and our overemphasis on providing parking and the few spaces that we have in the city. We seem to really want to use it for our cars. And if we want, and we always highlight the fact that how do you navigate the city unless you have a car? Well, if we keep providing more spaces for cars, we never get there. So I do want to highlight that point. Additionally, I want to say there's plenty of room, as Mr. Gorin had highlighted, for art. I want to see as much art as possible. That would, I think it'll add a lot to the space. And then to Commissioner Lodge's point, I'm not going to push for this as a condition, but I would love if the applicant looked into a solar/battery solution for power outages so that it's emissionless, especially where we're going and especially being in the coastal zone. I think I would really like if they at least evaluated it for some future edition. And then I want to also applaud the images that we saw of this space. They were phenomenal. And I think if we had those for projects in the future, I think that trumps story poles every single day. And the images that we got today were especially good. And so if we could see that more often, I would love that. But I will be supporting the project, and I will throw it back to you, Chair Schwartz.
Thank you very much. Any other comments before I comment? No? Okay. Yeah, I think that today between Mr. Bauman and Mr. Gorin, so both on behalf of staff and the applicant, I think the bar was definitely raised in terms of the tools that you brought to the Planning Commission so we could have a three-dimensional, a realistic picture of what we are entertaining today and what could possibly be transformed at 11 Anacapa. And I say transform because I really think that the change that's being proposed is going to be a cornerstone, a very important positive cornerstone transformation in the funk zone. It's already begun, but I think this will continue in this adaptive reuse that we need, as opposed to demolishing older buildings. The property owner here has clearly dedicated himself, and with a dedicated creative team, to going the distance in creative, sustainable, adaptive reuse into the future. And that's what the funk zone needs. So I appreciate that. Can't help but comment on parking. You know, I feel that our community is obsessed with parking, and I've discussed this before. Certainly for my remaining months on Planning Commission, I won't be able to see cleanup of our zoning ordinance or it being shipped off to the Coastal Commission for certification for improvement. So I guess I'm just gonna have to follow that kind of from the sidelines. I wish we were there now. We've needed it for some years. And maybe my colleagues can help accelerate the cleanup process at some point. So in supporting this project, I want to make one aesthetic comment two aesthetic comments about the new standalone parking stackers. And I wish we had that slide up in front of us that Mr. Gorin showed, because today may be the first day ever for me where I say, I love the look of a parking structure. I can't imagine that I've really ever said that before. Even a beautiful Spanish style looking parking structure down in El Pueblo Viejo, to me, is not as exhilarating as this is. And I really hope this comes to fruition just as it's been portrayed today. And at night, that view of what it looks like at night, that's a piece of art in and of itself. Look at that, it's right before us. This may be a popular hangout just for people to look at a standalone parking structure. I don't know. I'm just saying that this should really inspire everybody in the city to think outside the box, so to speak. And to Vice Chair Escobedo's comment about public art, yes, let's really be welcoming of that. Let's find ourselves towards flexible approval of more public art on all these empty spaces, these large sides and backs of buildings in the Funk Zone and elsewhere. I think that we've, in recent years, not really carried out our passion for, our values for, and what can be also a big economic draw beyond what it is now to Santa Barbara in terms of public art. So I'm very enthusiastic about that and supportive and welcoming of that. Those are my comments, and I will be supporting the motion. Anything else before we ask Ms. Fennessy to do a voice vote? Commissioner Lodge, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz. I just wanted to make sure that F1 got tightened up. That's the one on making sure that the conditions of the conditions of approval are all met before a certificate of occupancy is issued. Did that?
Yes, Commissioner Lodge. What we could do now is ask Ms. DeBusk to come online and read the minor changes, but important changes that we've discussed making as a part of this motion and the conditions of approval. And then I think we'll be ready for Ms. Fennessy to do a voice vote.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. I will start with the added condition to section, sorry, I'm looking for the number G6B. So that added sentence regarding the valet. The valet parking attendant has the full and exclusive responsibility for operation of the parking stacker. And then the addition to condition F1 would be to add at the end, to verify demolition of the tenant space as previously required by, and then we would list that coastal development permit number.
Thank you.
Just let me see everybody nodding. Does that language work for you before we go to a voice vote? Yes, I see thumbs up, great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Busk. Let's go to Ms. Fennessy now to do a voice vote on the amended motion, and as Mr. Busk read the amendments in the conditions of approval. And here are our findings.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz and Commissioners. I will now start the roll call vote. Commissioner Bonderson?
Yes.
Vice Chair Escobedo?
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yes.
And Chair Schwartz?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. Very good. We need to announce 10 calendar day appeal. Is that correct, Ms. DeBusk? Could you just confirm that that's what we're doing?
Yes, Chair Schwartz, that is correct.
Here we are, and the language is on the screen for everybody to see, for us and members of the public. Thank you so much. With that, this item is concluded. Right in time, Commissioner Higgins, for your hard stop of 5 o'clock. So let's do this. Now let's go to our final business. I'm gonna pull that paperwork back, excuse me. And these are our administrative agenda, committee and liaison reports. We have a staff hearing officer liaison report, Commissioner Higgins.
Yes, show had a pretty packed agenda yesterday, and but it was the usual stuff with one exception. There was been a subdivision map on some commercial buildings on Anacapa Street, so that was the only unusual item. And then I unfortunately missed the Caltrans meeting yesterday, so I was hoping you could provide that update.
Sure, will do. Okay, other committee and liaison reports. Commissioner Bonderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have an ABR update. I have 3 projects to report on. The first one is of interest to us on Planning Commission because it will be coming to us very soon. It is the Montecito Country Club. You've all probably been keeping up with, and it's going to be a proposal to permit an as-built family recreational site improvements to the event lawn at that country club. If you're interested, it's addressed as 920 Summit Road, in case that's the way you're familiar with it. And if you are curious, I would recommend that you watch the ABR hearing. It was on May 3rd, and the project requested design approval as well as final approval. However, it was continued indefinitely to us first before returning to, for final approval to consent. The consent agenda for final approval. Sorry about that. So it did not receive the final approval until first it comes to us, and then it will go to their consent agenda. The next project was actually seen twice since we had our last hearing. So this next project was requesting final approval. It is at 1230 San Andreas Street. You may recall that I have presented it before. It is a proposal for a project that demos 2 existing dwellings in exchange for the construction of one new 3-story multi-use residential building. And this is of interest to us because it does take advantage of the city's AUD incentive program. The proposed density is for 27 dwelling units per acre on a medium-high density parcel, which allows 15 to 27. So this is at the max end. Final approval was requested, and it was continued 2 weeks to consent with some comments. And then it was seen again since we last saw each other. So on May 17th, it came back, and it did receive final approval with 1 condition and a comment, and we are now in the 10-day appeal period. So last but not least, moving quickly here, there was a project that was seen by ABR again on May 3rd, and it was at 923 Castillo Street. This project should sound familiar to all of us because it came to us last year on February 13th, and it was approved. And we were on the dais. We worked together the last hearing. And this project, as you may recall, was a proposal for the construction of 3 2-bedroom condominiums. It had 7 parking spots on site. And it was consistent, or it is consistent with the residential multi-use zone. They have proposed 14.57 dwelling units per acre, but it does fall into the medium high density, which allows 15 to 27. So they're right there rounding up. And this is exciting because it creates 3 new residential condominium units. So they did get their design approval, and it was continued indefinitely to consent, to the consent agenda. So that should be done soon. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Bonderson. Any other reports before I give mine? No? Okay. Very briefly, Highway 101 HOV Mainline project. We had our 10th working group meeting this week, and the applicant team reported that after going to the Montecito related decision-making bodies, very positive, very favorable feedback on the proposed design work that our working group had done. We also took up the following design issues this week: the Union Pacific Railroad and Cabrillo Interchange retaining walls, the 5-year planting plan, signage, street lighting, the Olive Mill Hot Springs off-ramp sound wall, the northbound shoulder retaining wall between Olive Mill and Coast Village Circle. And that took up our hour and a half, as you can imagine. We do not have a subsequent meeting scheduled yet, but I want to give a shout out. This is a large and very diligent, very organized and creative team at a number of agency levels. And you can imagine how complex a project this is. And so to have the cooperation and collaboration that I'm experiencing, and I'm not a design expert, so I'm just in awe of the design professionals who are involved in this endeavor. And I'm really appreciative of being a part of it on behalf of our Planning Commission. Lastly, I'd like to let everyone know that I am in communication with city staff, particularly Ms. DeBusk, on an ongoing basis in terms of the potential timeline for when our commission can return to City Hall chambers to be in person to conduct our hearings. So stay tuned. We don't have a date yet. I'm sure everybody's anxious, or most are anxious to do that. It just feels like it's been so long, and it has been almost a year and a half. So I know we're eager to be back together in person, and staff will help us do that just as soon as possible. So with that, I think that concludes our business today. Any other comments, thoughts, colleagues or staff before I adjourn? No, very good. Okay, thanks to everyone, staff, my colleagues, members of the public, the applicants. Again, another productive hearing at Planning Commission. Thanks to everyone, and we'll see you all soon. Stay well. Bye-bye.